Good morning to all, and thank you very much for having accepted to take part in this workshop that is in the series of digitalization of the Energy Action Plan. We will have 3 panels, and yes, I would like to maybe start with recalling some rules. We hope not to have too many technical problems as well. First of all, be informed that the session is recorded and will be available on our website. And in case you have some connection problems or issues with regard to your attendance, there are very strong noises, so all the microphones must be muted. I don't because we will have a lot of participants. So please mute all of your microphones. So all the videos and microphones should be switched off, except for the moderator and for the panelists who are currently speaking on the panel. If we notice that some of the persons who are actually panelists have joined as attendees, we will so the host, the European Commission, we will move you to the panelist session so that you can take part in the presentations and in the panel. The participants can ask questions, but given the large number of the audience that we expect, above 300 participants, we would kindly ask you to put the questions in the chat, and it will be up to the moderator to take these questions during the panel and to bring them to the panel. And we will then have the virtual coffee break so that you can log off or just leave the computer at 10:15 for 30 minutes, and then we will restart at 10:45. And after the conference, the recordings as well as the conclusions will be made available to the audience and will be published on our website. With this, I think that we can start the introductory part where we would like to present to you the main policy framework on data exchange on electromobility. And our first speaker will be Axel Volkeri, who is the Deputy Head of Unit in DG Mobility and Transport, dealing with electromobility in particular.
Thank you, Kasia, and good morning to all. Good to be here, and good to see so many. I just see that the participation rank crossed over the 100, so that's really good to see, and it also is sort of certainly gives evidence of the importance of our discussion here today. And very interesting discussion, and as you can see from the simple fact that you have 3 DGs present, namely DG ENER and the colleagues from DG ENER, and many thanks to them, are the key in organizing this workshop, but also DG Connect and DG Move. It gives a simple evidence of the cross-boundary nature of the topic we are discussing here, namely the facilitation of integration of electric vehicles into the energy system and the data exchanges. Now, I don't need to say that, but I will say it nonetheless. You all know, of course, that registrations of electric vehicles are quickly accelerating, and they need to further accelerate, as we have clearly noted in our Fit for 55 package of last July. This is a key cornerstone of our effort to bring suitable contribution from the transport sector to the overall climate ambition of the European Union. And in that sense, of course, we've made a number of key proposals already to help facilitate this transition. The Commission has put forward an ambitious revision for the CO2 emission performance standards for cars and vans. The Commission has also put forward a proposal for a complete overhaul of our policy framework on alternative fuels infrastructure deployment, with the proposal for a new regulation on alternative fuels infrastructure deployment. And I think evidently this is clear, infrastructure and vehicles need to go hand in hand. We cannot accept that a lack of public accessible and then also private recharging infrastructure becomes a bottleneck to the uptake of those vehicles. And that is also why the Commission in December put forward a proposal for the revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive to ensure that there is sufficient private recharging infrastructure. But with all of that, of course, it is not enough, because as the focus of this workshop clearly shows, I mean, it is not enough to only bring vehicles into the market. It's not enough to bring sufficient recharging infrastructure into the market. We also need to ensure that all of this works, and that on top, the energy system is capable of integrating those vehicles efficiently and effectively into the system. And I think with this workshop, there are a number of key areas where we are going to discuss how this integration can effectively work. You've seen them in the invite. This is about the data exchange framework, consumers empowerment, key enabling technologies, cybersecurity and privacy, and data centers and impact. And I think it is important and very timely to have this discussion, which will, of course, feed into the further work of our colleagues in DG ENER into the digitalization energy action plan, but it will also, of course, feed into all the other work strands which colleagues from ENER, from Connect, and from MOVE are involved in. So in that sense, we are really looking forward, because it is important to have this system integration perspective in mind when we speak about the transition that is clearly ahead of us, because this mobility transition to a zero emission pathway is not possible without the energy transition. And the energy transition will have to largely benefit from the possibilities that an increasing number of electric vehicles bring. So the two of them go hand in hand, and it's not only two, it's actually three. And then I'm looking forward to my colleague from DG Connect coming in, because in all of this, of course, the underpinning element is data and exchange of data, and making sure that vehicles, infrastructures, and users, in that sense, can efficiently and effectively communicate with each other, that consumers know transparently what they are up to when purchasing and using an electric vehicle, because that is in the end what we want to achieve. We want to make it as easy as possible and as transparent as necessary to use an electric vehicle without any hassle anywhere in the Union. So maybe with that, I leave it here. I wish all of us a very good discussion today. Colleagues will later take you through the three panels in this morning. And then I look also forward to sort of good discussions, good conclusions. And with that, I hand it over to my colleague from DG Connect. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Axel. Good. Thanks for the introduction. I will share my slides. So you should be able to see them now?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, excellent. So good morning, everyone. Thanks, Axel, for the introduction. I think that was very timely, as you said, and it's important. We need an efficient integration of EV charging into the energy system, and you emphasized that one. My name is Rolf Riemenschneider. I'm from DG Connect, Internet of Things, but what I present is also largely driven by colleagues from Mark van Stiphout as well as Kasia, which you already know. The background for that, the digitalization of energy strategy, obviously has two main policy streams, the European Green Deal and the European Fit for the Digital Age, where we launch quite a few digital initiatives. As Axel said, the energy system integration strategy is central. It's central to drive the energy transition, and the digitalization of energy action plan is one element of that one. but also what was outlined already is the Fit for 55 package is very ambitious in reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 55% across different sectors, integration of renewables, the energy performance of buildings, and you mentioned it, the zero emission pathway for transport. So for those of you who have participated in the consultation on the digitalization of energy strategy, you know the 5 areas already. And for EV charging today, it is the data sharing infrastructure, how to get access to the data and exchange data, but it's also, it was mentioned already, the empowerment of the consumers, just to put it in the right context. And it's our take to work on to take your input from the consultations and the input from the workshops and to put it in sort of what we call a staff working document. Now it's foreseen to be communicated after summer, but I think we are really happy that you contribute and that we really can rely on your commitment and your input. From the digital point of view, we launched a few digital legislative initiatives. I don't go into the detail of all of them, but it's the Digital Governance Act, the Digital Market Act, the Digital Service Act, the High Value Data Act, the upcoming Data Act, and so on and so forth. The Digital Market Act is close to adoption. The others are still, for consultation. But what is in there and what is the implication for the sector? The Digital Governance Act, for instance, looks to establish a European Data Innovation Board that provides guidelines for cross-sector data interoperability. So quite some to setting a framework. But even more, it tries to foster trust in data exchange institutions. They created a term of a neutral data intermediary to facilitate data sharing across different competing institutions or across different institutions along the value chain. So this neutral data hub could be also important for the energy sector and related sectors if you want to have data exchange across different sectors. The upcoming Data Act has a key objective to ensure fairness for data handling, for B2B data sharing, for private sector data and co-generated IoT, Internet of Things data. So it targets a framework for data interoperability as well, and it will complement the sectoral legislation in the area of energy to apply and to be adopted gradually to what is then in the Data Act. So how does it link to the digitalization of energy strategy? Developing a European data infrastructure is one of the key elements for the system transition. And one of the key elements here is the development of a common European energy data space, establishing agreement on data handling, data tools, and data infrastructure. And secondly, was mentioned an interoperability framework many times to set the boundaries for that one, but also to implement it then in the different sectors, and to talk about the possibility of a digitalization of an energy governance system. So these 3 elements are also pertinent to the workshop of today, and we will come back on these elements later on during the different panels. From the Commission point of view, we have launched a program called Digital Europe Program on common European data spaces. This is a program which targets deployment of data spaces in different sectors. You see the different sectors which we have over here, including mobility, which is done together with colleagues from Axel's unit and DG Move and Transport, but also we're targeting the implementation of an energy data space. Common technical tools for data pooling and sharing, common principles for applying artificial intelligence and setting the standards for data formats, data exchange, and data interoperability. So that's quite important to look at the interoperability within individual sectors, but also across different sectors. And that is a key element if you look at a coordination for data spaces under this program. And going back to a workshop what we had on Wednesday, we need interoperable data spaces. I think that is the key element to not keeping data into silos. And if you talk about the different data spaces, we discussed on Wednesday already some basic principles, design rules, concepts done by the Bridge working group, and others. I think these are guiding principles which help us to arrive, at a deployment action later on. But also what is central, and it was mentioned already this morning, we have to go across sectors. We have to link the different sectors from smart homes and buildings, from the integration of renewables, and as well as the mobility sector for charging. Otherwise, we will not be able to achieve the targets of the Green Deal, and it will not happen only in one sector. So looking at that part, looking particular on EV charging, the EV charging value chain is terribly complex. There are different stakeholders, there are established stakeholders, like grid operators, there are key industry like the automotive, there is the consumer, and we have new entrants in the market. So we need to find a compromise between public and private. We need to cope with the dynamics of the market and the technical dynamics of energy flows. We need the technical interoperability that you can plug and charge. We need to take into account mobility needs, especially of the driver or the consumer, in order to match his expectation and to make him invest into that new infrastructure, a new paradigm. As well as we have to take into account geographical differences across member states and avoid fragmentation. I would like to hint on a report quite recently published on recommendations for regulatory measures for cost-efficient EV charging integration, which expands on this complexity of the value chain. But this, to sum up, what are the big tickets for today? I think one is speed. You see in the picture the number of electric vehicles per charging point, where Greece is quite falling behind, and we have forerunners like the Netherlands or Sweden, where they have a very, very low number of electric vehicles upon charging point, indicating a very performant charging infrastructure. So we need speed, but we also need green energy. I think we want to charge the electric vehicles with green energy and not with fossil energy. And last but not least, we have need to look at the different policies. They have to go hand in hand, and policies should not act against private or public investments to speed up the process. So with this spirit, I wish you an enlightening and exciting and stimulating workshop today. And it's a pleasure to follow that one today and to pass the floor back to Kasia. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much for this introduction. I think it gives a very accurate picture on the complexity of the stakeholders and on the complexity of the challenges that are ahead of us to make the smart charging and bi-directional charging happen, and to integrate three sectors: mobility, energy, and data. Without further ado, I would like to now open actually the first panel, which is the EU data framework for energy. So that will tackle the point of view of the industry, where we have asked the panelists and the moderator to actually reflect on three questions. What is the data that the grid operators and energy companies need from charging point operators and car manufacturers, and also vice versa. So the other ones would need from the TSOs and DSOs and energy companies in order to enable smart and bi-directional charging. The second question about service and business models for smart and bi-directional charging, and what type of real-time data exchanges is needed to actually make this happen. So that goes a little bit into wider perspective also of in-vehicle data and data that is necessary from the grid operators on the share of renewables. So I would like to invite the first moderator and the speakers of the first panel to step in.
Yes, thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so my name is Omar Lumi. I work for Nokia, mostly dealing with 5G for verticals and cloud, but in my previous experience, I also represent the Alliance for the Internet of Things Innovation. Just 1 minute of background information. I spent several years working on IoT, and over time it became very, very clear for us, the IoT experts, that the natural evolution of IoT is about trading and exchanging IoT data. The value proposition is about generating new revenue streams and new value beyond the original intent for which the data got collected, but also having this cross-domain application that will profit from data sets coming from different domains. And I think Rolf made a nice introduction on why this is needed. EV charging in relation to energy system is a typical example where we see the data exchange across a wide variety of actors to be extremely important. Today we will open this session through 5 minutes introduction from the different speakers. We have a distinguished speaker representing the Alliance for the Internet of Things Innovation, the European Network of Transmission System Operator for Electricity, Volkswagen, the car manufacturer, and a data aggregator, Jetlix. So without further ado, let me give the floor to Natalie Samovic, representing the Alliance for the Internet of Things Innovation, to bring her first perspective. Natalie. Natalie, are you connected?
I think, Kasia, you have to move the Natalie.
Yes, let's start perhaps with Norella. Indeed, I have seen that Natalie is in the attendees list, so I would suggest to start with Norella.
Now then we go to the second, which was York, I think, what we discussed.
Yeah, let's go to York. York, thank you for being us today. I see you are connected, and so you have a couple of slides to present. It's about your Jetlix experience as an activity.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for the invitation. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Can you also see my slides?
Absolutely, yes.
All right, so short introduction on Jetlix and people who don't know us. So Jetlix is a smart charging service provider. And by doing so, we run a cloud platform that enables smart charging services for our partners. We have our own app, but also enable branded solutions for example, car manufacturers, Renault, Hyundai, but also do that for energy utilities. Technologies we use to control the charging is a variety that can be via the connected car. Like Omar probably knows, many cars are connected these days, have the ability to exchange information, control the charging flow via the connectivity you have on board. Alternatively, chargers are also being connected, and we support that route as well, sometimes even a hybrid of the two, to have the best of both worlds. To explain how our platform positions looking at the markets, we call ourselves a technical aggregator. So, and we combine a variety of energy flexibility services. So the topic of today is mostly focusing on what's the data exchange and how can cars be enabled in certain markets from the TSO or DSO in the future. But obviously, smart charging is much more than that. That starts behind the meter on the household level. An EV driver can have certain tariffs. He can have solar at home. These are typically items we collect via the utility or via the user directly or via other sources, and we include that in our optimization engine. And then secondly, depending on the client, is he supplied by an energy partner of us? So I've shown here a couple of examples of parties where we work with in the Netherlands. We optimize the charging within the portfolio of the utility. So we have an integration with the balancing and trading teams behind those suppliers to make sure that basically their costs to supply energy to this EV driver at home are lower. And on top of that, within that portfolio, we could also deliver balancing services, so generate some revenues. But this is obviously conditioned to that the EV or charger that we control is within that particular portfolio. An alternative route that is quite exciting and also quite relevant for example, parties that do not have a footprint in the energy value chain is that we operate balancing services independent from the energy supplier and balancing responsible party. Some people call that the aggregator route. The wording for this role is balance service provider in the Netherlands, and there we sub-aggregate the cars and deliver balancing services towards the TSO. So that's an interesting route in case, for example, a car manufacturer wants to enable wants to create some revenue generating services, but is not bound to one particular supplier. But yeah, the whole portfolio of cars in a particular country has all kinds of energy suppliers. Well, due to the turmoil recently, people might not want to switch, or they do, but there's all kinds of reasons why you would not like to do that or not. And then this is an interesting route that is now more and more supported by TSOs, although we indeed have lengthy discussions on what data is shared or not. If I start on the left side, what information is needed for the utility? It's a bit simpler because this is not per se bound to market rules, but typically this requires the presence of a smart meter. And as long as that meter is logging the result, the control and steering that we do with it to charge your car, we know that the position of this particular utility is done right. Some of these utilities, like Frank Energy, have a dynamic rate offer. So as long as we know the market prices or their spot price and charge the car at the most beneficial moments, this solution works, is beneficial for the client. He has a lower energy bill, and everybody's happy. If you are exchanging this within the portfolio of the utility, obviously you need to make sure that the sub-metering of the car is correct, which you might need to use to settle the results. But you can do this bilaterally and not per se bound to particular data quality elements. If you're following the route on the right side, yeah, we have to comply with the rules of the TSO. And yeah, here we see that that this is still a bit uncharted territories for some TSOs, because they have all kinds of rules on delivering balancing services. And yeah, typically we provide a real-time aggregated signal of all the cars. We do collect interval data from the car charger, but typically on a 5-minute level, because otherwise you're really blowing up the whole data stream. And that's not typically how these assets are designed for. But typically this data resolution is enough to make an aggregate signal if you have a couple of 100 cars. And yeah, TSOs seem to be open for this, but this is a new approach compared to, let's say, big power plants, which have a telemetry meter and make that work. And this is something we're now, yeah, engaging different TSOs on, certifying lab tests, doing real life demonstrations to show that this is accurate enough and stay within the boundaries. But yes, in some cases, in order to really operate on the markets, we need to have a bit of, yeah, experimental framework to really operate there. So that's it for today, since I'm bound to 5 minutes, and give back the word to Omar. Thank you.
Thank you, Jörg. Maybe if we have 1 or 2 questions for clarifications, we can take them, but only questions for clarifications. Otherwise, we keep for the end of the for the discussion session. Okay, it seems not. I have some chat. So, 1 quick question for your interactions with the different stakeholders in the first slide. Is this based on standards, or what kind of standards you use, or is it based on a bilateral agreement with the stakeholders? We cannot hear you, Jörg.
Sorry. To some extent, this is based on bilateral agreements. So if you look at the information exchange for delivering secondary regulation reserve, that is, there we follow the product requirements of the TSO. So that is to some extent standardized, and via Picasso and other elements that is quite uniformal. But to what system you push your results or settlement data, that's obviously every TSO has a bit of a different play there. But yeah, the way the product is designed on a general level, that's the same. On the way we collect data, we see that OEMs have different implementations. So yeah, we really have an abstraction layer there on how to interact with that. On the charging station side, there is some protocolization. We use the OSPI protocol. We did help to draft that and make it a bit better fit for smart charging purposes. And on the utility side, this is more bilateral, I would say, depending on what flexibility product you operate on. Yeah.
The other question that came in the chat, you have cloud-to-cloud kind of data exchange, but do you have cases where you collect the data directly from the devices or the meters in your case?
Typically, we work cloud-to-cloud. So the direct connectivity with the asset is done by the car manufacturer or the charge point manufacturer, or the DSO is doing the smart meter. We try to step away from that till the extent we can, because the more that's needed, the more you typically complexify the whole case, and yeah, it's already a challenge to make everything simple, combine the use cases. You have to deal with tariffs, for example, but yeah, that's something we can get from the cloud. But to make everything work and a bit standardized across Europe versus all local flavors.
Okay, thank you, Jörg, for this introduction. Then we go to Natalie Samovic on behalf of the Internet of Things Innovation. Natalie, can you speak? Okay, we seem still to have a technical problem for Natalie. Then we go to Michael from Volkswagen.
Yeah, hello, good morning.
Good morning. Welcome, Michael.
So I try to share. So now it should be up. Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Thanks for the introduction, and also I would like to pick up with my introduction some points already mentioned, but I would like to start with a bigger view of a bigger picture, because what do we need for CO2 neutral mobility? Because that's the target for all the automobile industry, and also what is a big part of the Fit for 55 action plan. And the first thing is, to do that, we need CO2 neutral energy. And what I can say is that the energy is existing for all the mobility, and also the cars are on the road to hit the target, potentially 40 million vehicles in 2030. So that's what already Rolf Riemschneider mentioned, that the increase of market is seen and is further coming. So this is also not here yet, but it's on the road where it needs to go to hit our overall target of -55 CO2 reduction. But there's something in the middle what has to be discussed, and that's how this energy is transferred. What is the grid status? What is possible to do and when? And also the question, what direction, yeah, and how that shall be communicated. And some of these answers are already being given, but we have to take care that all these parameters are being met. And the key thing also what mentioned before is that best would be that all charging points are intelligent. They should be technical, also interoperable, not only between two components, it should be also on the whole value chain. It should be integrated, it should be connected, so the data is also flowing through all the different part of the chains. It also should be international. It should avoid to have national rules which are not supporting, and it may be also having different rules which are making difficult as a mobile device, which the car is, to go around and to have always the same functionality. And then for sure, already mentioned today, there have to be enough charging stations. Best case, all what you can get should be smart. And it all should be strategically aggregated in the overall picture I'm drawing here. Yeah? So the CO2 neutral energy and the electric vehicles and the batteries of electric vehicles, they all have to be strategically aggregated in a way that they're working perfectly together to support, let's say, each other, to support the energy transition to renewable and to use the renewable physically as best in all the vehicles, and also on the other hand, that the vehicle demand and the customer demand for their vehicle usage, for their mobility, has been also strategically taken care of and integrated. And that all should be at the end also international standardized regarding communication, regarding data, but also all the physical connection and the regulations which are behind to connect all these on the digital and on the physical energy flow. Then I would like to bring it a bit on a bit easy page. That was Jörg just mentioned a bit more in detail. I just wrap up here on a more easy, higher level. So there is different optimizations possible, yeah? And typically it starts where the user have control of. Yeah? So local optimization regarding your own solar panel at home, your own maybe stationary battery where you can use your car as a mobile battery, also integrated into your household to optimize your own energy demand and your own usage of your own renewable energy. But also this can be expanded to as a market integration, so that not only locally by one household or by a multifamily household, but also by some regional or some channel integration of these mobile and stationary batteries into the whole energy market and optimize the usage of renewable energy. But also not only on the energy side, but also on the grid side, it also can support the grid. Yeah, either in the way that there is some load drop or load or energy renewable coming into the grid, which is maybe having some peaks. Both can be compensated by having more load in the cars, or maybe having in a low wind, low sun time and a high demand in the energy grid. That also be bidirectional charging back to the grid to support the grid. It's not only the energy market, but it's also potential to support the local grid to optimize it in a way of more renewable throughput, but also in the overall throughput through the grid, and also to stabilize the grid. And also last thing is also to somewhat balance, support the grid and the energy in the overall view, not local, but also in a more TSO and more overall European grid perspective. So this all should work together and should be coordinated. And then I step from the physical and from the functional layer to the communication layer. That's maybe also a bit complex for introduction slide, but also what have been mentioned before, that there shall be aggregator to bring all these different parts together. And like also Jörg mentioned that they are also connecting to the other backends and clouds. Yeah? So that means there's a safe connection between the EVs and the OEM backends, for example. And then there's another connection where also this communication can be used for energy aggregation, for grid aggregation, so that also on the other side, the energy market and the grids have to be connected. And then the communication can flow on different ways back for the loads or for the power flow to the grid. Either again about the way of the backends and clouds, the different devices like charging stations or EVs or other devices, but also maybe also directly through energy management in the households, or maybe also in addition of a direct communication, like for example, smart grid gateway or things like that. But also what I mentioned is that we have here different usage situations depending on, for example, the grid condition. Yeah? Is a grid condition on the green level, so there's enough capacity to accept more load or more renewable resources to be brought to the grid, then this can also be ideally directly being communicated and directly being controlled. But there's also maybe one in a 10 or 50 year case a need that there are some special situation where the grid is to protect it. There's also be an additional path potentially be useful, where also some loads can be over such a smart meter or EMS being directed to stop or to reduce beyond what is in the system approach, the system aggregation approach, where it's in the way that it's a function-oriented solution, yeah, regarding optimizing energy on the market, optimizing grid, and all the function what we have mentioned before. Yeah, so that's my quick introduction.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. We have a couple of questions for clarifications before going to the panel session. So we have one question about who's going to play this aggregator role, because everybody would like to step in for that role. That's one question. And the other question we see very clearly this additional dotted line that you have from the EMS within the household to the aggregator. And it could be beneficial if you shed some more light on how you see this and what's the value of this versus other mechanism, cloud to cloud, for instance.
Yeah, what I was mentioning here is that there are different ways which can be used, and also here on the right hand side there's also the ability of a cloud-based EMS connection to the aggregator. But there also, what also Jörg mentioned, there's a possibility that also in the future maybe some direct connections, but that's not maybe the typical use path. That's why it's here in a dotted line. I just wanted to open up all the different communication paths which would make generally sense, but maybe not be in favor of the usage or main usage in that field. Regarding aggregator, I'm today very open. Yeah, I will not give this role to any specific. It can be different, and it's somehow also part of the discussion where the aggregator function lay typically. If it's only in the vehicle, then you have some solutions which can be quick adopted. Let's say the OEM backend, it can be quick adopted, but it will not be fully integrated in everything in the first step. That can be also done in future, but also there are other things like looking from the grid side. That's also limited because that's not the full capability of the energy market being adopted. Yeah. So the aggregator role, which is somehow, let's say, a neutral position, which is in between all of them, is maybe a solution where all the different players can get together and can exchange. Maybe I just answer this also in a way of the follow-up questions in our panel discussion, but it's also a question of market mechanisms. Is it a direct communication signal with some software algorithms behind, or is it driven by market signals where the grid capacity is being reflected in grid costs for the throughput, where also the energy availability or the renewable energy availability, to be more precise, is reflected also in energy prices. So then it's also more in a way that there's some role in between where this can be played very, very neutral and very direct with this market signals. But I don't see yet that there's a clear direction already being given. There are solutions and being funded development projects with different kinds of these control mechanisms.
Thank you, Michael, for this introduction. Let's right over to Natalie. Natalie, can you possibly unmute? And I see that Natalie cannot unmute still. Hopefully the moderator can switch Natalie from participants to panelists. Let's work on that.
That has been done, but unfortunately that doesn't work. Perhaps we go to the next speaker. We tried otherwise maybe Natalie can relog once more.
Okay, then let's give the floor to Norella, representing the European Network of Transmission System Operators for Electricity. Good morning and welcome. The floor is yours, Norella.
Thank you, Omar. I will try to share some slides. So hopefully I will find.
When someone says some slides, I start to worry. I hope you can keep it short.
Yeah, I will try to keep it short. So I hope that you see actually my slides.
Yes, you can.
Okay, so I maybe step in by taking an even higher view and by giving actually the perspective from NCE, so the Association of the TSOs for Electricity. As you see, we see challenges and also opportunities. And what is important from electromobility point of view, it's of course that we actually manage in a way the electricity system, and the previous speakers were talking about services and so on. With the electromobility ecosystem, so having a kind of win-win situation. It's actually a question of trying, of course, to cope with the speed, but having in mind the implications and the impacts from both sides on electromobility, but also on the electricity system. What is important is to actually, and I think it was mentioned before, to have the scheduling and the power profile of the charging process. So this will mean for us actually this smart charging development. From the point of view of the customer, of course, there is the issue of stacking multiple services. And here we can think in actually the services which can be provided to the power system as such. Of course, we will have a change in the forecast patterns, especially from the load profiles and signals. And what I would like to mention, maybe in addition to what was said before, the planning and the location. Of course, the electromobility does not come only with the challenges, there are also opportunities. And for example, we expect that by 2030, we will have a kind of potential services from batteries, from the electromobility of 400 terawatt hour. If I go to the next slide, where I will tried actually to make a kind of, so we were making in the NTOE a kind of taxonomy by looking at the place where the electrical vehicles are located. And from the electricity system point of view, of course, the places where the the car is staying, so where we can have slow charging, then there the actually this type of flexibility services being I don't know what was mentioned before, frequency control, balancing, congestion management, ancillary services can be accessed. Then, of course, the public access, street parking with the planning actually capabilities. Then the collective parking and charging places where we can have a predictive actually demand. And then what is coming, probably the fuel station model and the hyperchargers, which will involve actually multiple megawatt potentially of demand. And we can imagine that if, for example, in addition to light duty vehicles, to private vehicles, to fleet vehicles, we will have trucks which will be electrified, then this can have actually an impact also at the TSO level. In terms of this taxonomy, so there is not such an energy issue. So yeah, we foresee maybe an increase of 6% of the energy demand. We have to cope with the capacity, grid reinforcement, and the trade-off with the storage capabilities which are offered by the cars, and of course the flexibility services which can be provided. In terms of modeling, so real estate estimation, forecast tool for demands, and data exchange protocols and standards, management and control systems through automation, and of course, what I mentioned before, value proposition for the customers, investment needs. So if we have smart charging, we actually can, and also bi-directional charging, we can reduce actually the grid reinforcement and even have actually this capability of load control, so peak shaving, and also providing flexibility services. So going to the data, and this will be my last slide. So vehicle usage patterns, as I mentioned before, the battery stage of charge and the capacity. We have, of course, to look at regulation and market signals. We can see actually services in relation to renewable production. And here the forecast and real time and the signals are important. And I would say that, yeah, what was mentioned before, the rollout of the smart meters with even closer to real-time data, it's relevant, but we have to solve actually the whole exchange of the data between these two ecosystems, the protocols which are there, the architecture which is also there, and of course to take into account the privacy and economic value of data. So I will stop here.
Thank you so much, Norella. I think you pointed in slide 2 and in slide 3 most of the problem space of, for this industry, because you put the taxonomy, you put also the standards that are needed. And then in this slide 3, I think you point also to the challenges, which could be market-related challenges, in addition to technology ones, which is very inspiring. Thank you for this. Let me check if I have some questions for you. Actually, I have one question for you. In terms of how much progress did you do in terms of the taxonomy? That's one thing, and it looks to me extremely important because we have to be speaking the same language between the different stakeholders, eventually from different domains and from different perspectives. That's extremely important. And the other question is that we are talking about this building the data space and connecting the data spaces, etc. And we know when you have a large number of stakeholders, traditional approach to integration will not scale. And then we see the role of standards. How much progress do you think we have made in terms of specifications work for making this integration work? So 2 questions: how much progress on the taxonomy and the interoperability standards, including for the datasets?
So I think we are still in the beginning. So we were trying actually to categorize the problem through this taxonomy. In terms of services, of course, we are in a way technology neutral, I would say. So of course we have different research projects in which we were looking actually in more harmonized type of products and harmonized approach. So before it was mentioning actually the balancing. Of course, this is done at national level, but we went at least in NCOE into a more integrated approach, having for the different frequency requirements actually pan-European platforms for dealing with primary, secondary, and so on reserves. However, I think how to say, this is still an open field, I would say, and probably the first thing to do it's to align, I think, on the architecture to ensure probably a kind of open data and open source approach in order to be able to integrate the two sectors. So we have to move towards this direction, I would say.
Thank you, and that's already deep in the panel discussion. Thank you for this. I think we have not sorted out the technical problem for Natalie. So, Natalie, I think I would like to suggest that we move to the panel discussions. We have 3 questions, and we have already started answering some of them. So the first question is about the categories and the categories which favor bidirectional charging. So, for instance, which stakeholders in the value chain is a data holder? This is the first question. What data would grid operators and energy suppliers need from charging point operators and car manufacturers to enable smart bidirectional charging? So who wants to go first on this?
So maybe I can start from the OEM side.
Yes.
So what we see important is that general, even if the data points are defined and agreed on, if it goes to specific customer-related data, the customer has to agree in some way for the usage of them. That's our general point. And regarding the specific data points, we see that with the communication between the EV and the charge point, there's already been defined a lot of data points in the ISO 15118. And we recommend to follow the path and to select energy and power related data points for that. And what we see as important is that some people still think SOC instead of charge is something usable, and it's completely not, because SOC is a relevant percentage value, and that's not reflecting what is needed in the energy and the power values to be able to regulate and to control the energy and power flow. So data points, what we see is important that the car and the customer is indicating what energy he needs, latest and what time in the car, but also that the car can indicate what energy can the car in total get. So if there's more renewable energy available, so there are at least 2 data points regarding charging, so energy at least needed, energy maximal be able to load into the car, and also the timing, when is this energy needed, especially if we then also use bidirectional charging, where the energy also can be put back into the grid or into the energy net. That also this is defined in a kilowatt hour value. So all these values are in kilowatt hour, and then also the timing for that is important, because they have a certain range what you can use for such bidirectional charging and usage in the grid stabilization and grid support. And also going with that is also important to have the power for charging and power for discharging. And all these values have to be created out of the battery management system, because this is only the technical point where this data is being able to create it, because that's related to the battery performance.
Thank you. Maybe we can give the floor to Norella to provide the TSO and DSO perspective, maybe in this case, about what data would need to be exchanged to enable the bidirectional charging. Norella?
Yeah, I'm here. Some difficulties to. So in order, I agree with Michael. So what we will need, of course, it's actually to know the what I would say. So the state of charge and the battery capacity. The maximum and minimum charging capacity of the vehicle battery, in order to know the range in which the charging can be adjusted. This is indeed for the smart charging management. In order to come to the bidirectional charging, so there we have indeed the information about how much we can absorb from that battery in order to provide the support. And further on, for the flexibility needs or the grid services. And probably, of course, what we will need a kind of aggregation and distribution of the patterns of those locations in order to have the information, especially if we go to the type of ancillary services congestion management capabilities.
Yeah, I have to get back in, because you mentioned that I said SOC and capacity, and that's exactly what I said, which is not usable, because SOC is a percentage value which is only valid in correlation to the battery capacity, and that's something which is varying very much. And also the capability what the battery can do is not what is on the theoretically plate on the battery is showing. It's something on a at the moment value. And I would really highlight that we should not exchange battery capacities or SOCs, because they are not the appropriate values. If we want to make energy development and energy regulation, we have to have the kilowatt hour, which is available from the battery for the grid for bidirectional charging, and what is needed to charge in a kilowatt hour value into the vehicle, and what is possible to charge in addition. I think that's something what we have to make very clear. We should take that only on the level of kilowatt hour values.
Okay, maybe I have one additional question on this to Jörg. Jörg, are you still with us?
Yeah, I have to leave in 2 minutes,
Yeah,
but
yeah. So, from your perspective, do you see new business models emerging, for instance, for flat rates or low peak hourly rate, etc.? And what would be the impacts of new business models on the data that could or would need to be exchanged? And what kind of data needs to be exchanged?
I think there's what are new business models? So I think smart charging is all happening much more than you might think, but because in many countries some form of load management or tariff management is already applied. Just to give you an idea, in Norway, more than half of all the cars are using spot rates for their EVs. This is not just the happy few. And something like that is expected in other countries as well. If these clients will also participate in balancing products or DSO products, that is sometimes to be seen. And if there are all kinds of hurdles on metering or other requirements, might be more limited. But you can also reverse it if there are already one or two other use cases like spot rates and other elements. And because of that, people already participating in smart charging, then adding a bit of grid services on top of that is easy, right? You already have cars under management, you're already controlling the charging, you already have the customer acceptance. So that's a bit of a parallel we see. If for bidirectional charging, you're fully dependent on the TSO service to really make the case, that might be possible, but then this needs to be simple, accessible, not relying on too many long-term agreements in order to make the case. Otherwise, it might be hard to adopt the additional cost that there is to enable this. So that's a bit of a parallel we see. So depending on the country and tariff structure, some behind-the-meter drive elements will drive smart charging adoption. And then when adopted, why not offer it to the TSO?
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you for this. If I understand correctly, Natalie is connected now. Seems not still. Okay, then back to you, Michael. Volkswagen has created a subsidiary to manage charging points in buildings. Can you tell us a little bit more, and can you bring also your perspective about eventually new business models emerging and what will be the impacts on data and data exchange?
Yeah, the let's say daughter company from Volkswagen is Elli, and Elli is making the whole customer service into a full service, because if you buy an electric car, you need a charging station, someone need an appropriate contract for energy, and that's what Elli is doing in addition, so that from the Volkswagen Group in total, the customer can have a full service for all he needs to be mobile with his electric car, including all the infrastructure at home. And also, what is also very important for Elli is that Elli is focusing very much on smart charging. And that's what we also see as an OEM is important. Like I mentioned in the beginning with the big picture, that the mobility is not theoretical CO2 neutral, also has to be physical CO2 neutral. And that's exactly the service what Elli is providing. Yeah? And all what is needed, which is maybe not existing, is something where Elli is supporting these new function and these charging and energy throughput for the CO2 neutral mobility.
Yeah, I keep an eye on the chat, and there was an interesting comment, is that why are we discussing in the context of cars and the possibility of providing flexibility is not limited to cars only. And I think that's a good reminder. And of course, that's not lost. But of course, we are discussing in the context of the discussions between the energy and mobility and the electromobility. Now, then we have this question about real-time data and the need for real-time data. So are there any thoughts about what kind of real-time data we need in order to enable this smart charging, bidirectional charging to take place? Any thoughts about this? Jörg, maybe this is a question for you. Do you have any thoughts about what kind of real-time data you need from an aggregator perspective? Maybe Jörg has left. Norella, can you comment on this? Any thoughts about the need for real-time data?
So I think the real-time data, of course, comes in order to cope with the certain signals coming from the prices. I would say so. It's related to the market aspects. The real-time data can also be related to the renewable production forecast. And actually the services which can be provided there in order to deliver towards the system, but also to actually cope with the renewable integration. This is what I would mention. And coming back to the previous question, what we see, I think, of course, the smart charging probably it's rather easy, I think, to be deployed. It will come first. Vehicle to grid or bidirectional charging, I think, as it was mentioned by Jörg, so depends also on the requirements of the TSOs and the enablers we will have there. This will probably come a little bit at the second stage. So this we can foresee probably from system perspective. And I agree with the comments made in the chat. Indeed, the EV are one solution, but there are multiple flexibility solutions which can be provided.
Yeah, and there was a comment that the flexibility solutions should be not limited to EVs. I thought that was an important comment. There was a mention of the usefulness of some IEC standards in this context, 61850. There is also in the discussion some think about what happens if there is a problem with the communication of that real-time data. And eventually that's hinting to the need to make the system resilient to, because we cannot, sometimes it's not guaranteed that you get that real-time data. And then to close this session, I would like to provide a little bit some thoughts about a possible call for action or actions. Eventually, I think it became clear through this discussion that because of the diversity of the stakeholders, the diversity of the use case, and the fact that data integration projects are very, very complex, there is a need probably at the European level, but not limited to that. And Norella, you said also the need for standards and open source. That's important. But probably there is a need at European level to drive cross-domain functions, including identifications, because interoperability across Europe is important. Security, protocols, and standards. And when we speak about standards, it's the standards for data and metadata. So this is one possible thing. And I personally think we have been talking about this for several years. Now we have a vision and we have to get to the execution phase on this. I mentioned that I noted that you mentioned this bilateral agreements between the stakeholders, and I firmly believe that may not scale for wide-scale deployments. The second point as a call to action is the need to create the conditions for an economic and legal framework across different domains for bi-directional charging. And then those are the 2 points that I wanted to put as possible actions. Any thoughts about this from your side, Michael or Nurella? And then we close.
Yeah, maybe some wrap up also regarding, you mentioned the security. So data security and the safety of that is very important, what you mentioned. Some parts are already been defined in standards. Some parts are already being secured, for example, the connection EV to the backend. But there are other players, and that's true. I'm speaking as OEM, but there are other flexible loads and sources being connected, which also have to be somehow being integrated in that system. We also have to take care of security. And the last remark regarding the data, what I also see is very important is not only what I mentioned, the capability of cars regarding energy load or energy source, and also the stationary batteries or heat pumps or whatever, but also the other way around. There must be somehow data which is allowing to control that, no matter who's in the control master function, that also some market signals has to be as an online data being available for the different players in that overall system to be able to react appropriately. And that's something also to be discussed on a European level, how and that would be in an appropriate way possible, so that all the different players having the ability to integrate that and to follow such mechanisms to optimize the overall system.
Okay. And Norella, any last reflections on those call to actions and those about the need to maybe join forces for getting the minimal standards for this to happen? And you spoke about the data sets and the data standards. You spoke about the metadata. You spoke about the taxonomy, which I thought it was an extremely important point, and also taking into account the challenges that you mentioned. So any additional points?
I think I would also mention maybe the planning and also the models where, we would need to exchange also the data formats and so on in order to, to develop both systems in a kind of a very synergetic way, so that they support each other. So the longer term perspective, it's also, I think, important, and what is coming from there.
Okay, then I'm done. I hand over to the organizers for the next session.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Omar, for very well also leading the participants and taking the questions. So we have now scheduled a virtual coffee break until 10:45, but given the issues with connection of the panelists, I suggest that speakers and panelists connect at let's say 10:35, so that we can solve these issues, and then we restart with panel 2 that will deal indeed with the protocols, technical standards, and issues of connection of vehicle to the charge point, and then further system, so charge point to the aggregator and to the network. Thank you so much, and we start for the speakers. Connect 10:35.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Panelists were supposed to be here a bit earlier, right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So you can wait.
Okay. So you can hear me, that's great.
Yeah.
The video
I
works well.
can see you as well.
Wonderful.
It's good.
Okay.
I still, Rob, yes, good afternoon. I see that Mr. Robert Baum is also here. That's good.
Hello.
Hello. Hello. Yes, we are just having still 5 minutes, but I asked speakers to connect a little earlier because we run into some technical issues in the first session. So it's good that you can connect and that you can speak.
Good.
Yeah, we still have 5 minutes.
All right.
Hello.
Yes, good afternoon. So I suggest we restart now the second part of today's workshop in the context of digitalization of the Energy Action Plan. In the first part, we have discussed the industry views on the key principles on how to achieve the combination of the data spaces between mobility and energy. In particular for flexibility, so between electromobility and energy, as I have said, with different views from the industry. And now I would like to give the floor for the second panel, which will be touching upon slightly more technical points and aspects from the point of view of protocols and standardization, and what is necessary indeed to have these emerging standards, emerging protocols actually come into implementation. I would like to give the floor to Saki Gerasis, who will introduce the panelists of the second panel, and then open for the presentations and for the questions.
Thank you very much, Kasia. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here today. And indeed, first of all, I'd like to present myself. As Kasia was indicating, I'm Saki Gerasis, Policy and Data Officer in DigiMove. And in this panel too, and in between, I will take the opportunity to briefly share a couple of slides with you to contextualize a bit this panel. So indeed, after the first session, the objective here is to go a bit more into the details. Of course, we are going to keep it in a reasonable manner, not going too much to the technicalities, but also allowing to go to the details that it's, of course, very important and absolutely necessary when we want to find and look for concrete results and conclusions. So in this panel where we will focus on mobility communication standards, particularly those data requirements and data exchange needed for the future integration of electric vehicles into the grid, and particularly how we could support and endorse in the future the interoperability between different data spaces, as could be the mobility and the energy. So in this context, I'd like, first of all, to start recapping and contextualizing very quickly what are we currently doing before starting to have the proper discussion. So at the move side, and many of you, you are seeing the participants here today, you are very aware of that. As part of our Sustainable Transport Forum, we have particularly since last year set up different specific groups with very concrete objectives that are intending to support our policy making, particularly in the context of the alternative fuels infrastructure, but also the links within energy size and looking, for example, to the Renewable Energy Directive, etc. So when we talk about the standards for electromobility in particular, we have a subgroup with industry members, more than 20 industry members, and also the presence of member states related to governance and standards, where what we are trying to do is to map and understand what are the current existing protocols developed by the industry, what are the current activities of the standardization processes, and how we can merge together and eventually gather recommendations that could be brought forward into legislation. So as you can see in the slide, we have several activities, some already finalizing from last year, where we will make the results publicly available for all of you in our web pages, dealing with the standards and the different areas I will quickly present right after. And on the other side, also more focusing on the data, we have in a similar fashion a subgroup on data, where we are trying to characterize what are the different data dimensions. For example, when we talk about the integration of the electric vehicles into the grid and the interaction of what are these particularly data types that are necessary, for example, to enable smart and bi-directional charging, when we talk about access to battery data, or for the user friendliness of the infrastructure for the user. So what data types, the amount of power, and for example, any other aspect related to the share of renewable electricity, and all those elements that are essential for the user and for the enabling of this charging technology. So this is what we are trying to gather, the experts from the industry in these subgroups, and that would help us materialize afterwards in legislation. Also, not to forget that we also work closely with public authorities, and we have in today here several participants in this regard. So we are happy also to support at the end implementation at the public level and not only the industry. So just before introducing the panelists for today, a big contextualization also for the panel today. So when we talk about the communication in the EV charging ecosystem and what we have been doing in the Sustainable Transport Forum, and we extrapolate here today, is to understand how the different strands in this communication, that is a complex, relatively complex system, how do they interact and what are the main areas. So in this regard, and how you can see a little bit in this kind of roulette in the left side of the slide, we have different interactions, particularly related to the interaction between the vehicle and the charging infrastructure. Later as well, we have the interaction between every charging infrastructure, every charging point, how they are linked to the back-end management systems and how they communicate and they are integrated with the grid. And on the other side, we have different types of communication, for example, related to e-roaming platforms and payment systems. And also important, the communication with the EV driver that can take in different manners, and it could be via app. We have different solutions that the market have put forward, and we are also trying to harmonize. And of course, every single of these communications has been developed by different protocols in the industry that now also from the policy side, we are trying to ensure that these are harmonized and we have interoperable solutions that simplify this quite complex outlook, particularly if we start looking at the future, not just at the public recharging infrastructure, but also to private, so recharging points in buildings, at homes, etc. No? So this is a bit what we are trying to simplify, and this is what you can see a bit in the right side of the slide, where in a more technical schematic way, what you can see is that all these large amount of protocols could be in the future converged into de jure international and European standards that simplify, reduce costs, and make an interoperable system that allows the communication between, in the end, with the different data spaces and create support the creation of new services. This is what we pursue at the end. So based on this contextualization, and you will see that we have very concrete topics here, I like to present very shortly, and we will give the word as for panel one for the different panelists to make a small introduction with a couple of slides. And we have here today Luca de Brucker from ECOS, Dr. Robert Bone from EBAS Initiative, and also Seni Barfi from the European DSO, that I will briefly introduce right after, before they do their presentation. So in a similar fashion, we'll be very happy that the panelists, very expert panelists here today with us, they introduce this topic, what are their views, and based on this basis, we have prepared a series of questions, a series of topics that you can see in the bottom of the slide, that I would like, based on the presentations of these panelists today, also to formulate, that could help us also to go a bit beyond on what we have been doing in the Sustainable Transport Forum, linking with the energy side and how the future energy data spaces and energy framework could work. So this is a bit what we are bringing for you today here in this panel. And also just to indicate, very happy to read all your comments and your questions, and between the panelists' interventions and the discussion we will have after, I will be very happy to formulate those questions from you, from the public, that we believe it's very important to help us identify those existing gaps. So after this brief introduction, I don't want to lose more time. You have heard me talking enough. So first of all, I would like to call ECOS. For example, I would like to start with Luca de Brucker. She's program manager at ECOS, that, as many of you know, is an international environmental NGO, working very closely and intensively on environmental friendly technical standards, and also working with us very closely in the move in the Sustainable Transport Forum. Good morning, Luca.
Good morning. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay, I can share a presentation I prepared. I suppose I will just be able to share. So let me search. Okay, I think you should be able to see my screen now.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes? Okay. So our position regarding EV grid integration and data exchange, I will keep it brief. Yeah, because of course there are other people who will share their position. We have much more to say on this matter, but for the purpose of today's workshop, I will quickly go through. Yes, so here is the first slide. So first of all, standardization needs. So as an environmental NGO, we are basically the only NGO who is also working considerably on standards, and we are also sitting at the table where those standards are developed. So in the realm of electromobility, that means obviously that we have been really active on the 15118-20 standard. So that is a very important standard, as many of you may know. It's a standard that will facilitate charging in general, but also for smart charging. It's very important. So this is, of course, this standard is finalized in the sense that the drafting is done and that we are waiting for the final publication soon in the coming months. Then the next bullet points, you see two more standards that are important. They are unfortunately not ready yet. So this is the 63110 and the 63119. The first standard is essential for the back end. So it's basically the connection between the smart home and grid and the smart charging realm. And it's the communication between all the e-mobility actors and also the information flows in the European power system. So very important standard, but as said, not finalized yet. And this is where we actually call for more participation, more European capacity of standardizers working in this IEC working group, because we really need that to deliver as soon as possible on this standard. And then a similar story for the 63119, where this is the roaming standard. So it is a standard necessary to enable secure payments, services, and roaming. Also there, more capacity is needed to finalize this standard. Then another important one is the Customer Energy Manager. This is a standard that is developed at the European level. We're very proud of this standard. We've been very actively involved in drafting it, and a very important version of this standard is about to be published also in the coming months. And it's a standard that is essential for integrating the electric vehicle into the energy management system of a building. So it can be used for more purposes, so it goes beyond EV, but we have been pushing for a proper integration of the electric vehicle into this standard. And then another one is a standard that doesn't exist at the moment. So as you may know, there are standards for power plants when they put energy on the electricity grid to do this in a safe manner. Now, we think it's essential that there is a standard that does this also for dispatchable loads. So that is basically electric vehicles. And to do this in a safe way and to make sure that the car can basically react instantaneously to any event on the grid and can actually support grid stability, we need a self-regulating power inverter. At the moment, it's not clear whether the power inverter in the car is capable of this. So to enable this, we need two things. We need a new standard that basically mirrors the EN 5549 standard, and we also need this to be regulated by type approval so that we know that cars are actually capable of this. I will go a bit faster on the other standard I mentioned there is very essential for flexibility. It's currently being developed. And then there are also two other missing issues where a standard is still needed, and that is the S1 interface. So that's a technical term, but basically this is what would provide information to the energy management system on congestion and other issues on the grid, which is currently missing. And then that's the same for tariff data, because, well, as we all know, this is different in many member states. There are many factors that influence tariffs. For instance, there could be a peak load, which can also influence then the price the next day. And also the problem there is that this is not available in a machine readable way, so that your energy management system can read this. So I will go to my next and last slide, and that is basically on data access. So our position on this front is that the customer is always owner of its data, and should decide what it is used for. So this is, as a general principle, what we find very important. Now, as has already been mentioned before by Michael Keller from Volkswagen, certain data points have been standardized now in the 1511 8-20. However, there are also data points that are not. And I'm talking here about, for instance, certain mobility needs, such as the travel route, but also other issues. And in general, we see an issue at the moment with access to data from a customer perspective, because at the moment it is very hard for a customer to actually have full access to his or her data. To enable this, an interface is needed so that you can access the in-vehicle data. However, we see that this is currently only developed in a proprietary way. So this means that a car manufacturer may have an app for this, but potentially this app is not integrated with your energy management system, for instance. So there we see that we need a standardized interface that works across brands and that can actually deliver true interoperability. To push all of this forward, we think it's very important that the Commission publishes its in-vehicle generated data initiative that has been announced already last year. We haven't seen it yet, and yeah, we're very much looking forward to that. And I will end by saying that we have spelled out many of these issues in one of the expert groups that Saki mentioned. So in the Activity 1 report that I suppose at some point may be publicly available. I don't exactly know. I think we have to ask Saki for that. In any case, there we have listed a lot of the issues, and we hope that this can provide a push for further action, both on the policy and the standardization level. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Luca, for this very comprehensive presentation and for going very well through all the different key issues. I'd like to make you a follow-up question, but before that, also to enumerate a couple of very important topics you have mentioned, and I have captured from you that you clearly mentioned that some standards are not ready yet, and this is also a very problem for us from the policy side when we have to come back to legislation, and how we deal with a situation where we have some international standards that are being consolidated, like ISO 15112, that some market players are all ready to start implementing, and we have now a new version that we don't have yet, that is like the -20, and this creates this type of inefficiencies also and uncertainties in the market for the different market actors, also from the policy side, that it's very, very important. Also very interesting when you talk about the roaming, and perhaps to clarify to all the energy stakeholders the importance on that, because also at the move data space in terms of the national access points, this standard, this protocol is being used for the charging point operators to send the data to the databases of the national access points. So in the future, it could be that this kind of protocols also play a role in how we send data to the grid side. And also very important what you mentioned on the need to provide information to the grid on congestion, tariff data. We are not doing that yet, and that's fundamental. And also looking to our side, indeed, we are looking forward for the initiatives like the in-vehicle generated data, that is going to be fundamental to open up the data from the battery to how we take it out later to the grid, and how we enable smart and bidirectional charging services or other services. So this is something indeed that will come. Also, as you mentioned, the report that we are working with several of the participants in this workshop on the mapping of these standards, that we are having some difficulties also on several technicalities to bring together all the stakeholders, but we are sure we are about to conclude that. So thank you very much. And just a quick question before moving to the next panelist. Also, just to clarify, how do you see that these protocols and standards can work together, not just for the public charging, but also for the private charging? How do you see that these protocols could serve both needs, or do you see specific needs from the private or for the public?
I think a very important standard is the one I mentioned, the customer energy management standard. This one is really key to have it all work basically on the private level, because this is the energy management standard for buildings. Yeah, but indeed the other standards are also very important for private charging. So I know that we are focusing a lot on public charging also because the push for standardization from the Commission side has come from the Alternative Fuel Infrastructure Directive, regulation I should say now. And yeah, this is of course mostly public charging, and we appreciate the push that is coming from the Commission on this end. But indeed, we shouldn't forget the private charging, and these standards will be essential for this also there.
Yeah, thank you, Luca. Absolutely, and yeah, absolutely. And we also from the Commission, what we are trying to do, and many colleagues here are so very aware that these standards, like when we talk about ISO 15118 or the grid standards, that they cover both use cases, not just the public but also the private. So we have a more simplified approach. So many thanks, Luca. So now I would like to move to this short intro to the next panelist today. I would like to call Dr. Robert Baum, Managing Director of EE-BUS Initiative. As you know, non-profit organization, cross-sector international membership with about 65, 70 members from automotive, electric vehicle service equipment, and many others. Hello, Robert.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for introducing me and the EE-BUS initiative as a non-profit organization. So I am pleased to be able to contribute to today's discussion. I'm sharing my slides with you. Let me put them into presentation mode, which is here. Okay. Hoppala. So, one word up front. We were asked as speakers to really limit ourselves to 2 slides only, which in itself is a challenge. So just like Luca limited herself, I also only have 2 slides with me. Instead of giving a kind of general first slide, who are we, what is EE-BUS about, I think we already said this in words. We have around about 65 members. Very important to state is that these members are cross-sector members. So we have members from automotive industry, heating industry, white goods, PV, battery, EMS manufacturers. It's very important to mention this since we're talking about standardized communication and interfaces. When I thought about limiting myself to the 2 slides, I thought, okay, what can I use as an introductory slide, and maybe coming from a neutral source. So I picked up a slide from the German Automotive Association, VDA, and now comes a big surprise. At least it was a surprise to me. We have already seen this slide this morning because it was shown by Michael Keller from Volkswagen in a slightly moderated version, so modified version. So I think Michael did some modifications. I took this slide directly from the homepage of the VDA. And now one could say, and I swear I have not aligned with Michael up front. This is by coincidence. And it never happened to me in a workshop like this that 2 different speakers come up with the same slide, especially when you have to limit your number of slides to 2. So one could say this is a real coincidence. but maybe it is not just a coincidence, because I thought about it during the last hour. How comes that we picked up the same slide? Actually, I think it is related to the fact that Norela pointed out this morning. She said that we need to align on the architecture. And I fully agree. And I think this is one of the essential things to be clarified. And this picture gives you the overall kind of architecture, where you see the EV on the right hand side, and you have the building in the middle, and you have the CPO, and you have DSO, TSO, the energy market, the energy aggregator. So you have all kinds of participants on that picture, and the architecture showing the different communication paths that are possible between the different participants. Now, when Norela said we need to align on the architecture, what Saki showed in his slides before was the communication in the EV ecosystem. But actually, since this workshop is about integration into the energy system, the EV ecosystem is not large enough. This system is the overall system and the overall architecture. And so I believe that there's a certain reason why we see this slide 2 times. And now, where is EEBus playing? EEBus in this slide is the green communication lines connecting from the central point, the energy management system in the building. So we are a protocol developed so far inside the building, which is connecting PV from the roof to storage, stationary storage. We have HVAC systems. There could be other devices, and we have, of course, the EV part. So the EEBus protocol, so to say, it's was developed in 2012. We started in 2012 when the energy transition was not that far developed as it is today. And at the time, the big story was we have a PV on the roof, and we want to optimize self-consumption inside the building. That's why we started as a protocol inside the building. But now comes a very important development from last time. So we see here the connection to the energy market, to the DSO. And here you see, because this slide is focusing on Germany and US, you see OpenADR as a grid protocol, as a grid standard. And you see the connection to the building. And here's the grid connection point. And so you have one protocol on the left-hand side and one on the right-hand side. And what I'm happy to share with you today is that actually we made a bridge between these 2 sides of the coin. So you have the OpenADR protocol for the grid side. You have EEBus as a protocol inside the building. Both of them meet at the grid connection point. And we have just started end of last year a cooperation with OpenADR. So we showed in a white paper that we jointly published that both of us, if you combine OpenADR with EEBus, and we showed how this is done, which data points can be mapped consistently so that you can use both standards, that then we can implement full end-to-end connectivity, meaning from the DSO to the building. There are 2 very important terms here. We talk about capacity management and tariff management. First of all, for the capacity management, now the DSO with our standardized use cases is able to monitor if everything is all right with the grid. That's what Michael said. Is the grid condition in a green level or is it maybe in a red level? So you need a use case, a standardized use case to be able to monitor that. And if your grid runs into problems, if it's in a red level, then you can send a limitation signal to the devices to actually limit the power consumption and to restabilize the grid. On top of that, if you are able to exchange tariff management information, you can allow for the devices to optimize their consumption within the limits that are given by the market or by the DSO. And in total, what this is offering is whoever is the player, like the aggregators or the external market participants on this slide, there are certainly new energy business models emerging. And with the use cases that we have developed, we will allow for these business models while keeping the physical limits at the grid connection point, meaning that the grid that we allow for the business models when the grid condition is allowing for that. So that is our contribution as an association in this field, and thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, Robert, also for your presentation and for reflecting in a very illustrative manner. This slide particularly really catch me on how you very well explain, and particularly I think this is also very good to convey to all the audience the difference, for example, between open ADR, the grid market side, and what you are doing on EV bus, and looking at the building side, and how we can bring all this world together, where in between is a little bit this EV charging ecosystem, right? So how we create all these links and all these all these bridges all together. So that's very, very clear. Maybe if I could ask you just a very quick follow-up question. If I ask you, what is for you the biggest challenge that we face ahead? What would be for you the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge is for me that when I talked about the grid connection point, which is the physical point where the two sides meet, that this interface, the communication interface at this grid connection point is not yet standardized on a European or international level. So we have an application rule in Germany, but this is not, when you talk about standardization, this is not enough. And this is what our members are always asking for, especially also the automotive. They want to be sure that their solutions work in first of all on a European level, but secondly also on an international level. This is why I think VDA has put a focus on that slide on USA and Germany. Because as you know, the US market is a big market for the German car manufacturers. So when we talk about standards, why not make them really international? So the grid connection point standardization, from my point of view, is the biggest challenge ahead.
Thank you, Robin. That has been very clear, and I'm sure we will come back to that later in the discussion between all of you of the panelists. And moving now to the next and the third presentation today here, I would like to present and introduce to Seni Barfi, that is Policy and Legal Director at the European Distribution System Operators, EDCO in Brussels. That, as you know, EDCO is playing a key role between the interface between us, the policymakers, and the distribution system operators. Hello, Seni.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me here today. I will take just a second to share my slide. Yeah. Can you see it?
Yes.
All right. Oh, okay. I have to say no replicated slides on my side. Nothing as my previous speaker here in the panel. So I'm really I'm happy that he mentioned though the distribution grid, because that's what I'll be touching upon. And as you can see, the interaction in order to make this transition possible and to accommodate the electric vehicles into the grid will not be possible only if we play alone as an actor. So I'm going directly into the core of the issue. So first, I will just start a little bit from the policy side, what we see the challenges ahead, and in order to prepare ourselves for the new world, which has these three kind of pillars we all know about: decarbonization, decentralization, and digitalization. And what does it mean? It means that there is a lot of effort behind in order to accompany this transition. And for instance, electric mobility will be one important part of the puzzle, because most of the renewables will be connected to the distribution level. Somebody mentioned it in the morning session, and that will be true. It's expected to be 75% connected to the grid in the distribution side. And when we talk about the electric mobility, it's indeed also this part of that is expected to increase. We also know that. And as DSOs, we cannot possibly own and operate, except some cases or kind of exceptions. Nevertheless, we need to be ready to accompany it, to have the infrastructure and to take the grid in order to accompany the process and to accommodate those electric vehicles into the system. One other point which is very important is connections points, but also the energy efficiency and the kind of network losses to be taken into account in all this kind of evolution. And what is our approach as a DSO? Just very briefly, we are the market facilitators, but on the other side, we have a huge responsibility not only to uptake the grid, but also to interact with the other actors, as TSOs, in order to make that, to accommodate the challenge. Now I'm going to move to the next slide. It's not about standardization, but it's more or less in line with what it has been said. So this is how the future would look like, and all the kind of flexibility of the power needs to accommodate the customer's necessity and flexibility, but also in order to facilitate the charging. Distribution grid is there and is part of this formula. It's part of this kind of scheme. Nevertheless, in order to be possible, there is a customer perspective, but also is a TSO, how we interact with them. And it's also about this interoperability that I will come later, because one part of the standardization is also how you make interoperable the way of communicating or different layers of protocols that exist. And that is very important for us because it gives a proper indication and it reveals the information we need as grid operators in order to upscale ourselves. And if you don't have the proper kind of information, you cannot predict necessarily what are the needs, and therefore you might fail actually to accommodate the electric vehicles and charging needs in the future. And I will end here with a very simplistic way of putting. We talk a lot about bi-directional charging, and this is one of the technologies still in experimental phase in some countries, and still it is not yet finalized in the sense what can be all the advantages and challenges of it. But what is more important is the distribution has an important part to play in there, because for the first time you have this kind of opportunity to accommodate the renewable sources into the grid and to communicate with the electric vehicles, and to have this kind of balancing of kind of power flow, and in order to accommodate better, but also to have this energy storage that we usually speak in our jargon, in order to see how the energy can be stored in a perfect and proper timing. So I will end here, and of course I'm happy to hear any thoughts or any question you might have for me.
Thank you, Sani, as well for your very good and illustrative presentation and introduction. And I'm sure now we will deepen into many of the topics you have navigated us through. But before, also a very quick follow-up and general question for you, because after seeing and listening to your presentation, you have, and I think very fortunately, talk about accommodate, facilitate the integration of electric vehicles into the grid. Now a bit, and looking in the context of this workshop, what would be very interesting to know also from the DSO side is that what do you really need, also looking at the charging infrastructure, the OEMs, in terms of data and standards, particularly when we talk about data, semantics, so what concrete elements do you need to support this upgrade of the grid, to facilitate this integration and real-time communication? So what do you think is missing here?
Definitely. That is a very, very good point and question. Real-time data will help us a lot, I have to say, in order to communicate with the charging points. But what is more important is this, as I mentioned before, it has to be how to manage the resources, renewable resources, and that means to associate with the assets. Can be the scheduling, charge and discharging, can be the demand response, price signals, but most importantly will be the predictability. So for instance, to predict for every 15 minutes or even long-term predictability, what will happen in 24 hours if possible. And if you can communicate that accordingly, it would allow us really to upgrade the grid and to manage that in order not to have blackouts or any kind of congestions. And I think that could be only possible via the protocols that exist, and somebody mentioned before in the presentation, there are a lot of them. Some of them are European, which is a very kind of good step forward. And we as EDSOs, I have to, DSOs and EDSO as an association, we have always been saying we need to be technology agnostic, in the sense we don't want to position ourselves which technology fits better and which we can actually promote. But it's true that it seems that nevertheless, some protocol seems to play a better role or to work better. And this is the case, for instance, for open automatic demand response. It seems from our research that it works better and it interconnects better with the DSOs.
Thank you, Seni. And indeed, I believe we are, particularly when we look at the grid, we are still in a phase, and particularly you, the industry, with the standardization organizations, to understand what works better, what makes more sense yet, and how we can harmonize all this. And very interested what you mentioned on how to manage renewable resources and how we link it with demand resource, price, scheduling. That's indeed essential. So thanks a lot, and now moving to the next phase of this panel, and I'd like to make it very interactive with you, and perhaps very interesting to start the discussion already linking what we have been discussing now with Seni on what protocols, what would be needed for real-time communications. I'd like to invite again Luca and Robert to perhaps turn on your camera and have a bit of an interactive discussion, particularly between you. And I'd like for that to raise a couple of questions based on the main topics we would like to deepen on today. And afterwards, of course, happy also to read and bring some of the questions that the audience may have. So to this respect, and starting with the first question that you can see already in the screen, I mean, one of the main topics that also we were discussing now with Seni would be to know what are the emerging standardization needs. So what do we need, and also linking how the policy side can support the industry. So what do you think is missing? And Robert on that gave us already some very good insights on what are the main challenges. And later linking what we discussed now with Seni, how do we ensure real-time communication? So what is missing and how we ensure real-time? What is your view? Happy that some of you takes the floor and listen to you.
I think I already gave a kind of answer to the first question, saying that from our point of view, clearly the grid connection point is the issue to be solved in terms of international standardization. And let me say that maybe with other words, pointing that out. What I see is that you have in total probably 3 different types of stakeholders in the entire overall architecture. You have the DSOs, you have the external market participants, and you have the assets behind the grid connection point, the assets being the devices, so like heat pumps, EVs, charging stations. And these 3 stakeholders, they have different kind of interests, of course. So talking about the DSO wants to ensure the stability of the grid. For the external market participants, and by the way, that was an excellent question this morning, who should be the aggregator? And Michael laughed a little bit and said, well, he is open and he does not want to fix that right now. So I think because we are really in a moving in a moving world where it's not fully clear yet which business models will establish over time and who's playing which role. But nevertheless, we know that there will be aggregators, or we know that there will be market participants, and their interests are of course different to the ones of the DSO. And last but not least, you have the manufacturers of the devices, which I would call the assets. And these manufacturers also, they want to participate in an emerging energy market. Saying this, for me, it is just an observation. These 3 stakeholders, they come together via the grid at these transition points where the communication meets. And what we need to ensure is a very basic level layer, that they can talk to each other, that they can exchange their information that is needed for the business models. And that is what we as an industry standard are developing. And it would be nice to get it into the IEC standard.
Thank you, Robert. Perhaps Lucas, Annie, you want to give us your views, complement, refute?
I can give our view. Well, I think most, as Robert as well, most of it has already been said in my presentation. So the standardization needs, apart from 15.11.8, there's 20 that's coming up, that is very, very essential also for vehicle to grid, obviously. It's also, well, standards that currently don't exist yet, such as the one that sets specifications for dispatchable loads and the self-regulation of the power inverter that I mentioned, and then also the information that should be given to the energy management system in terms of the congestion, the power levels, and also the tariff data. So I've mentioned it already. But yeah, to answer your question here.
Yeah, absolutely, Luca. And indeed, also, I think what Robert mentioned is very important in this moving world. And when we talk about the roles and responsibilities of also every industry actor, also to understand that there are no overlaps, particularly when it comes to sharing the data, making this data available, and also creating the right incentives in the market, right, for everyone to feel comfortable making and using this data and creating the afterward services that the aggregators will do. That, right, indeed, this is something, as has been discussed before, that is not clear and, of course, requires more maturity, and that the different use cases also get a higher degree of usability, right? So
yes, but perhaps there is one thing I can add to this also, and that is when talking about this one standard for dispatchable loads that we need and that is currently not there, I think it's worth mentioning. It goes a bit into the nitty-gritty of the standardization making process, but some people may be aware of the standardization request that has been issued by the Commission, particularly DG Move, under the current alternative fuels infrastructure legislation directive or regulation, however you want to call it at this point. And it's important to note that there is a call for this standard in the standardization request. Unfortunately, it did not make it into the list of deliverables. So we will still have to see how that plays out, but I thought I mentioned this fact to everybody here.
yeah, absolutely, Luca. This is something we are also following with the standardization organizations, with the different committees, to ensure that they are also ready to take that and will convey better the need. And that's very clear. Seni, do you want to take the floor as well?
Yeah, just to follow up, actually, thanks to the previous speaker, but with Robert, because he mentioned exactly what we are struggling. For the first time, every kind of actor in there has to interact with each other. It's no longer a process of DSOs, of the customers, they need to talk. And I think that is part of the solution. But you have to see now the interests are very different. So when you speak to a normal citizen, of course, what he's expecting from this change? To be affordable and easy. Can you imagine the range of anxiety of waiting in line? Sometimes the charging points differ from each other. So standardization is part of that solution. Therefore, or cards to pay, for instance, the charging. Therefore, I think it is important. When it comes to the DSOs, it's true we are thinking about security and supply, so we need to know whatever it takes into the grid, not only to facilitate the energy storage, but it's also to kind of interact with the system and to be secure. And that is also part of how can you accommodate into the standardization and certification process that anything you put into the system is certified and standard verified, basically that is safe to be included into the grid. And of course, when usually we did a study like a year ago and taking again how much investments we will need to be upgrading the grid in order to accommodate the upcoming challenge of electric vehicle. And of course, when the customers look at us and that study had only the impression DSOs are looking for more money to invest in their grids and to say we have done our job. But this is not about it. Of course, the grid needs to be accommodating and to invest more and more because we are talking about the technology which has been years when the electric vehicle was not even thinkable. But it's also about the customers, how to use it easily, how to be relaxed about this upcoming possibility. So, and indeed, the standardization process kicks in that process because technology needs to communicate also with all these parties and make it feasible.
Yeah, absolutely, Sani. One of the solutions is that all the stakeholders talk about among each other, and this is, I believe, one of the objectives, particularly when we look at the grid of this future data framework for energy and the data spaces. How we ensure that all the relevant stakeholders to talk among each other, and also we put the means to facilitate that and create services. No, so that's fully clear. And of course, standardization also is a key part of this process, and of course it needs also to improve, be more agile, and help us that all the needs indeed, as Luca was mentioning, on dispatchable laws that are being taken into consideration and they are effectively developed. So that's very clear. So I'm looking also to the audience if there is any particularly question. I see several comments on the different interaction between the standardization groups. I also perhaps would like to, before moving to the next question, to get a bit your insights, because Shani, you were mentioning security, right? So this is also a topic we are struggling a bit on. How do we ensure the security in these communications, right? So when we talk about cybersecurity and how this data exchange, and particularly when we talk about real data, what is needed to ensure the security between this interaction and exchange of information?
Well, security, it means you don't have the cybersecurity issue. I mean, it will come, but you try to prevent that from coming into the system, because if that happens, whatever you do into the grid, it will not work, because you will have an attack, or basically it will just challenge the grid in itself. I think what can help is the way you operate the data, because you can see, and I didn't manage to bring that image to you, but different protocols at different stages work differently in order to communicate the data exchange from the grid and into the charging points. And we mentioned the assets, we mentioned the inverters, connection points, everything works in a different way. So the standardization will work in such a way that helps to know which type of communication is actually communicated at which time, and it's related to which kind of charging point. And that helps in order to foresee where the damage or a kind of threat might come. So I think that is what the Commission now is working very hardly into, the interoperability. So any system you put in place, it needs to be interoperable and communicate with each other. Otherwise, the security cannot be reliable.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's clear and point taken. And indeed, it's as you were mentioning as well, is something that is to come, and we cannot easily predict. We all know that something is going to happen at some point, so we have to be prepared and protect all the different strains. So that's clear. And before concluding, I'm also looking to the time that is getting on top of us, and perhaps moving away a bit from the second question that all of you have covered, and Robert, I remember with this slide that display very well the difference between EV bus, OpenADR. I'd like to go to the third question and ask you a little bit. When we talk about particular specific technological solutions like smart and bidirectional charging, and looking at this future energy data framework and interaction with the move data space, so in essence, what are the specific data requirements that do you think that are missing or are needing to carry out this integration and enable the wide market implementation of this technology? So what are we missing here? What do you need? What do we need? What's your views? I don't know who is the brave who would like to take the floor.
I just make an observation. I think part of this question was already discussed this morning, and I think it was Michael who gave an answer on which data points need to be exchanged in this setup. And there are, of course, other types like you would need to exchange a grid code, for example, that you know where the EV in which country is it located, because the rules may differ from country to country. But apart from this observation, I think that this question is probably to be answered by our DSO participant. So I would be interested to get an answer from Zeni on that.
Sure. Yeah. What data can help, I would say from a technical point of view, can be the location information. For instance, home energy management system with the charging station and household connection to make it possible. Usage past periods can be something that communicates with the system and DSOs. What real-time capacity can be something that I think it needs standardization, only it helps to communicate between the CPOs and DSOs. And forecasting short-term prediction and long-term kind prediction capacity. I think this, I see it as an opportunity, but mainly the location information can be very important for us as DSOs. For the main reason I mentioned before, management of the grid, security and supply, where the load comes, and in order to predict where there are peak loads and off loads in the system. From a DSO point of view, this is the kind of information we are looking for, or that I will specifically pick.
Thank you, Zeni. And I think it's also a very good point to conclude also with, I think, some names and surnames that you have mentioned on the location information for the peak loads, etc., that this is what we are aiming to hear today and to understand in view of the setup of this energy data framework. So that's very, very useful. And yeah, I think we have to close already. First of all, I'd like to give you the three of you for these presentations and these insights. And I'd like just to conclude and call my colleague Kasia, because we know we have a very interesting third panel and also the time is ahead of us. So thank you, the three of you, and Kasia, back to you.
Thank you, colleagues, and thank you panelists as well for this interesting discussion. I would like now to move to panel 3, where we will actually discuss how to build the governance framework. So we have heard this morning about technical challenges, interoperability challenges, missing protocol, access to data. So on one hand, what has been achieved and done through different frameworks, so legislative proposals, but also stakeholders' work through the Sustainable Transport Forum. And in this third panel, I would like to invite now 3 distinguished speakers, panelists who have a lot of experience in this domain of electromobility and setup of the charging ecosystem. Bart de Bray, who is person coming from ELAD, a Dutch organization in charge of deploying electromobility and charging at the national level, also now advising at European level. Szymon Beliński, who is the director in the Polish Ministry of Climate, Department for Hydrogen and for Electromobility. So also very active in terms of setup of the entire ecosystem, and also having the point of view of the public authority, how the governance could be set up. And we have also the speaker from the Association of the Consumers. I would like to give the first floor to Barte, and then we, as for other panels, we will open up for discussion.
Yes, thank you, Kasia. Let me check if I have the slides over here. Can you see my screen?
Perfectly.
Yeah, perfect. Well, the question is, what kind of governance, and of course government, do we need to oversee the data exchange between mobility and energy stakeholders? But first, one step back. The whole idea about the European Commission or the European Union is about the fundamental freedom of commerce, of movement of people, services, goods, and capital. And at this moment, we focus a little bit on the movement of people, of the people driving electric vehicle from nation to nation. And of course, their interoperability is very important. But the car itself also represents a value. So it's often addressed when you do vehicle to grid. Well, a person driving on a summer holiday from the Netherlands to the south of France, for example, probably won't do vehicle to grid on his summer address, on his vacation address. But maybe on a second-hand market, that Dutch vehicle or French vehicle is sold towards Poland or Italy. And then, therefore, it's very important that certain aspects on data aren't only solved by national regulation, but on a European platform, because otherwise this freedom of people, capital, the car itself, is hindered. And of course, the energy sector also comes in. Markets are intervened. Energy is generated in Denmark by wind, for example, and used somewhere else in Europe. So this is why the international market, the European market, is so important. And in our opinion of ELAT, we need governance to support this market, because it's very new, and traditional standards like ISO 15118 or the IEC are a bit organized in specific sectors, either mobility or energy. And what we now need is cross-sector collaboration. And we need new standards fast. OCPI was mentioned, for example, for roaming. And my company is known for developing OCPP. And the success of such open standards is that they're developed fast, cross-sector, so mobility players can join, ICT players can join, we see energy players, grid operators can join, multiple players. And a small elephant in the room also with these new standardization bodies is that they're not dominated by, well, foreign players, to name a few, Chinese, for example. So what we must not forget is that we develop an international standard for Europe, which is highly dominated by other continents. So therefore, we're pleading also for new standardization boards to be fast, to be cross-sector, and to have a specific European focus. And of course, how can we do this? Should we do it nationally, or should we have an independent European authority? Of course, always with the customer in focus, to prevent vertical lock-in for the customer. Also, always be a bit aware when a company says it's going to supply you with a full service subscription. Then you know, as a customer, you might have the possibility to be locked in vertically. And if that's your free choice, okay for us. But keep in mind, when you sell your car to someone with a vertical, with a full service subscription with a different company, well, you might not have that full second-hand value, either if it's your HEMS, your home energy management system, if you sell your house, or you sell your second-hand car. But it's also important to have this independent authority for the market organization. We want a level playing field in Europe. So with possibilities for innovation, for new startups, for smaller companies penetrating the market. And for this, there are some key issues for possible solutions. Guarantee interoperability, of course, not only traveling from country to country and being able to charge your electric vehicle, but also being able to sell it when you're buying a new vehicle. A second role for a European authority might be the monitoring of fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory access of data. Additional data might be needed to facilitate open access and single supplier recognition, so new players, but also monitor the fairness. And FAIR is an abbreviation of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But it's also fair as we all know it, not cheating in the market. Reasonable is if you make some cost by aggregating data, of course you can ask a fee, but that fee should be explainable and not just a big number on every data transaction. And non-discriminatory is, of course, treat all your customers equal. So no beneficials for a daughter company or a specific company in your territory, in your country. Quality of data, that's also a role for the European authority, in our opinion. And act as an intermediate in case of a conflict between players, between sectors, between a big company and a new startup, or consumers and the business. Vehicle to grid is new. It's talked about. In the Netherlands, we have some first projects running. Jorg mentioned them. And for those who say, yeah, there are also other flexibility possibilities, keep in mind, people buy an electric vehicle with a battery the coming years. And this is an added value. While if you buy stationary storage, you have to buy that extra storage. While if you use the battery of your car, you don't have any additional cost of a consumer. That is where we, as ELAT, see a lot of potential for vehicle to grid. In the Netherlands, price transparency is very important, not only for charging your electric vehicle, but also discharging your electric vehicle in future when you're doing vehicle to grid. And of course, avoid permitting. We nowadays see some very big entities buying preferred location or buying a little bit of the market while it's under development. In the Netherlands, we have a maturing market, but please be aware of new member states in the south of Europe, in the east of Europe, who haven't developed such a mature market yet. There's room for new players, small startups, local startups. But if you have a few very big companies buying all the preferred locations or buying all the permits, well, that wouldn't be in the interest of consumers and, of course, of new players. So there's a room, in our opinion, for governance, preferably by a European authority. Thank you, Kasia.
Thank you for this very comprehensive and very exhaustive point of view. I mean, that goes by far beyond the let's say the technical issues and the governance issues we were discussing only in the framework of this workshop. It addresses issues such as access to data, fairness for payments, or issues such as price transparency and permitting. So these are extremely valid points. Before maybe opening to the debate, I would like now to give the floor to the second panelist, Szymon, who has joined us, and give him also the floor to present how this could be organized from the point of view of the public authority and their experiences. And after that, we will have time for questions. Szymon, the floor is yours.
Okay.
Yeah.
As I'm here. Thank you very much. Just give me 1 minute because I have some problem with the presentation, but I think I will be ready. Okay. Okay, so I will try to. It's always the most stressful moment of the. I hope you can see the presentation.
Yes, perfect, Szymon. We can.
Okay. So I would like to start because from our point of view, we in Poland we connected the problem of electromobility with the energy system. So we so the electromobility as a part of is a very important part of the transport sector, but it's also very important in the point of view of energy system. That's why we in Poland all the legal acts that are connected with development of electromobility are in the minister that also responsibility for the energy system. And what is I think the most challenging when we talk about the development of electromobility is how to connect electric vehicles to the energy system. And what we need to do this is a smart metering and smart grid. It's very important to roll out such solution on the energy market to create to help develop electromobility. So that's why we I maybe last year we create the legal framework for smart metering, and we establish energy market information operator that is responsible for the collect all the energy data from the market, and it's a digital platform. And when it comes to electromobility, we have some lesson learned because at the beginning, when we start working on this legal framework, we oblige the charging station operators to send the data to the energy market information operator, and we thought that it will be very helpful for us and for the market to know how much energy we used for the electromobility, and it also will be very helpful to create all the solution for the vehicle to grid. But energy charging operators told us that it's the burden for them, and we withdraw from this regulation. And for today, only I say the energy market actors send the information like DSO or seller of the energy, and the electromobility market is we leave the electromobility market, and the charging operation do not send this information. but I think when the market will develop in the future, they will be obliged to send this, because as for today, we see that it will be very important to know how much energy we use only for the electric vehicles. And also we need to develop the smart metering and the smart meters. As you see on the slide, we are at the beginning of this way, on this path to smart metering. We would like to have smart meters at least in 80% of end users by 2028. And we have all the detailed way to do this, but we create, for today we create the system, and I believe that the system will develop in the future. But what also is very important, we need to have a balance, and we need to create the regulation that help us to have a balance on the grid. We foreseen two scenarios for the development of electromobility in Poland, and in both of this scenario, the use of the demand of the electricity is not very high, because in optimistic scenario, demand for electricity will be equal about 2% of the total net electricity generation. However, and I think that someone already mentioned this today, is the capacity. What's very important is the capacity of the grid, especially distribution grid, because when everyone would start charge their vehicles at the same time, we could have a problem with the grid capacity. That's why we need smart metering, and that's why we need the data for our system operators to plan the grid, to plan how to manage the peak during the peak load during the day. And I think it's what we need to create such regulation on the state level, and then we need to go on the European level. And but we need to do step by step. So as you see, we create the for the energy market, we create the operator of the data, and we also create the operator of that operator, and this operator have information about the charging station, the localization of charging station. The power of charging station is a Polish agency that is responsible for technical safety, for the technical safety, also of the technical safety of the grid. And we have the special database of all public available charging station. It's also very important for, of course, for the EV users, but every charging station have a unique number, and we believe that in the future it help us to create the roaming system, but also to create us the database that could help us manage all the grid issues in the future. But now we have to connect these two systems, and it will be challenging, and it also be challenging to start to think electromobility as cross-sectoral issues. It's also electromobility is very important from the transport point of view, the carbonization of the transport sector, but it's also very important when we said about the energy storage, about the development of renewable energy sources. So I don't know that we need to start discuss between the sectors how the low emission sources in transport sector should develop in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Shimon. Before, again, maybe opening for more general questions on the governance and how to organize this market, I would like now to give the floor to the last speaker from the Association of Consumers. So our colleague Robin is here with us.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I have the pleasure to be the last speaker, if I understood correctly. It was great to hear. I mean, I've been listening since the beginning, and a couple of remarks to end up. It is indeed a very complex issue that requires lots of data exchanges, lots of talks between stakeholders. So I'll be ending with my usual focus on the consumer note, because I believe it's something that we've addressed, but we need to make it real for people buying an EV, should they buy a new one or a used one, for that case. So there are indeed a lot of initiatives, notably on standardization and open platforms or discussion that taking place, and it's very good. It's very good. I think this is the way forward because it's still a relatively new matter. But the main problem I see at the moment is on the policy side, how we define the policies, how we make all the policies coherent, and what's going on for the moment at the European Parliament and at the Council level. How do we make sure that all the pieces of legislation that are coming up are a coherent package, so that the standards, the discussions can take place at the right moment. On the consumer point of view, I think there are a couple of elements that need to be mentioned. We usually talk about grid flexibility, and it is of course important for the integration of renewables and load management. But it is quite unclear at the moment how consumers can benefit from it. We're lacking numbers, we're lacking the financial aspect of it. We all assume that money can be saved from using smart charging or vehicle to grid. But there are several conditions to it for consumers to take it on board. First, they need to know what is going on with the car when plugged in. They need to be reassured that it's working. And for them, it has to be hassle-free. If I compare, and it's a study that we will release in a couple of weeks' time, we try to compare the effects of smart charging or using different electrical appliances on peak hours versus lower cost moment. And if you want to smart charge, let's put it that way, your washing machine or your dishwasher, it might be not worth the hassle for consumers. You could win a couple of, dozens of euros a year. So not sure you want to go that way. For electric vehicles, it's different, and we have a huge opportunity for automatize all this smart charging periods and bring benefits to consumers that can be of 200 to 300 euros a year. And that starts to make a difference, knowing the charging cost being the main issues for people around. And I think making that thing realized, so that consumers realize it is the first important step. It requires as well education. It requires education as well, of course. And as I said, trust in the data that they exchange and how they can apply that without having to struggle too much. Now on the policy side, because as I said, it's for me one of the key issues there. There are several initiatives that are going on the energy performance of building directives, the alternative fuels infrastructure regulation, the renewable energy directive. And all of these policies have provisions on smart charging, on electric cars, on how to deploy them and how to use the energy. And I'm a bit skeptical about how the process is ongoing at the political side, because we see that definitions of smart charging can differ from one directive or regulation to another. But the provisions that have been set, for example, on the renewable energy, on data exchange and on availability of battery, is sometimes diminished by some policymakers while reinforced in other provisions of other regulations. So I think there's a big focus there to at least set the scene right, so that the standards discussion can go on in the right and the proper context. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, that's also very valid. You bring also very valid point from the point of view of, let's say, coherence of the policy action, which we obviously try to ensure, and making the value more apparent to the end user, to the end customer. So let me just in few words maybe summarize the main points of each of the intervention, and then I will put back the slides and open for the questions. I have noted some of the questions from the panel. So from Bart's presentation, it's obvious that he tries to put the focus also on the value added of the European authority or possible European authority for governance to govern issues that precisely are unresolved either at national level or between the stakeholders. So we have seen also in the chat, in the different presentations, that sometimes the stakeholders tend not to let's say fully agree on the scope of what needs to be exchanged and why. Also, a very valid point that Bart brought to the discussion was on the secondary market for storage. So there are indeed projects that have come live on the second life of the storage. So EVs, for example, used to enlighten arenas or sports. But perhaps this is also a discussion. It's just a showcasing of the value added of the, let's say, aggregation for the second on the second market. As well as a third important point on the transparency and non-discriminatory treatment when it is about access to data. So these were, let's say, the main issues Bart brought to the discussion. Shimon, very good also points with regard to some specific aspects, such as basic data on the network for charging that are managed and in a publicly accessible domain. So not staying with a specific stakeholder or specific provider that are brought to the public authority that manages that basic information, as well as information also on the deployment of the smart metering that could help the future deployment of the smart charging. And from the point of view of the consumer organization, as I was summarizing, the value to the end consumer, what all this combination between electromobility and energy system brings in the end to the final consumer. Does he find his way, and how to make this more explicit to him, also together with the very coherent definition and more coherent policy framework. I have noted one specific question to open to maybe more technical panelists. That is that. Yes, so the data behind the meter data and the access. The question on the behind the meter data in the charging points with public or semi-public access. How do you see this with regard to the settlement with the energy suppliers, with the aggregators, and with the DSOs? And the necessity to deploy or not to deploy the smart meters, that was the question of the Smarten with regard to the smart charging technology. So if you like to maybe take up these more technical questions, and then I will put back the main questions of our panel, which is the governance, how to set it up. The floor is yours.
Yeah, maybe regarding the metering and the data, a lot of data now is used to organize the system and the energy flow, the charging. But in the end, for frequency control, for example, you also need data for a validation of transaction. If the TSO is going to pay you money, in the end, his accountant wants to validate that there has been a transaction for a certain price. So we can install a lot of heavily calibrated meters, not only for controlling the energy management, but also for this validation. Or we must develop the coming years the possibilities of a blockchain solution. If you have multiple meters in a car, in a charging station, any grid connector, can you align them? So I think you must opt for those two pathways before you make a final decision on one of the two techniques.
Thank you, Bart, for this clarification. Indeed, that there are different technologies that are being pulled out and deployed to make this smart charging happening, and certainly it's not. And certainly we're at the stage of pilots in different member states, with vehicle to grid being even less developed. Let us perhaps now change to the more, let's say, policy-oriented discussion with regard to these questions we have sent to you in advance. Maybe starting with the second question. So what and who? So who, in terms of which organizations or which authorities you think could be needed to build this energy and transport data space go together and support each other? If you could, each of you maybe respond to that question in the way you see that.
Yeah, I mentioned, I think it would be very wise to have a European authority, because it's not only about the difference between European authority and national authority, but things are organized differently. Every country has a Ministry of Transportation and a Ministry of Energy, called differently, but roughly that's the case. And different member states make different choices where their e-mobility is. Is it an energy issue, or is it a mobility issue? And all these ministries have different regulatory boards and authority platforms. And then you get a very, very fragmented rollout across Europe, not only in where it is in your regulation, but also a different pace of regulation. Some member states are early adopters, others are lagging. And if we want to meet the climate goals in 2030 and have an interoperable system in Europe, I think regulation is in place, preferably on a European level, to have this coordination.
Thank you. That's very clear. Also, from the point of view of the necessity to coordinate in between the ministries, because the portfolio is scattered, and that's true that there is requirement to coordinate. Szymon, perhaps how do you see that? So, which organizations and which authorities you would see being involved to such as a pan-European, let's say, governance between mobility and energy?
I think that maybe at first we should set up that this organization should be public or private, because we have a discussion about all the data, electromobility data in Poland. Who should, I don't know, be responsible for the roaming system? Who should be responsible for the collecting data about the charging system? And we know that there are private organizations that would like to have to be the entity that is responsible for the data. In my opinion, it should be public organization. I think at first step it should be national public organization. However, I agree that in the end we should have one European authority or organization, maybe similar organization like for the transmission operators in electricity on gas system, that establish the common rules for all the electromobility markets and common rules for energy and transport data. But because I think it will be very difficult, because we are on the different level we have different market and we are different level when it comes to the deploy of the infrastructure and development of the electromobility market. As we see now, when we discuss the project of AFIR, there's also a different look about on the payment for the charging services. Like, for instance, we would like to have the roaming system with the phone application. Other countries would like to have a card payment, and so it is a lot of discussion ahead of us. And of course, we need to coordinate between different sectors like transport, energy, and I think it is the process that we are now, that we discuss all the ideas with transport sector and or energy sector, but energy sector have a different point of view on the issues that are connected with electromobility, and transport sector also have their opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. And Robin, anything to add on that questions of a possible common setup of the governance? So who should be part of this common governance framework? Anything to add on this main question?
Very briefly, I agree with Bart on the importance of the European level, definitely. One thing I would add is to make sure that the consumer can choose what he wants to do. Shimon mentioned AFIR, for example. Roaming and payment by card can be complementary, as it should be. It is not opposing one system to the other. As long as the freedom to use systems as the consumer wants it to be set for him is there, as long as this freedom is there, the rest of the possibilities should be set at EU level, of course. But it is important to keep that system open, because of course not all consumers will use smart charge. Not all consumers will have an EV in the coming years. Not all consumers want to be treated the same way. So that's the safeguard I would emphasize.
Thank you. That is very clear. That actually, indeed, and Bart also mentioned that in the presentation, to avoid, let's say, vendor lock-in or situation that lead to vertical lock-in, where the consumer would not be able to choose. But I take this point as one of the key elements you want to raise. Perhaps maybe now to summarize briefly the key governance challenges and issues. All of you have said in your presentation, you see these challenges. So again, things such as fair access and non-discriminatory access to some data has been mentioned. Some more technical aspects such as, and competition aspects, by the way, such as permitting procedures for the installation of the charging stations have been mentioned. Yes, and how all of you would like to build what you have heard from each other, and also from the questions in the chat. Which are these key governance aspects that you would like to highlight today to the audience?
Well, I think I started with the very beginning of the European Union, and that is in line with Robin's presentation. Keep in mind the open market idea, free movement of people. So you want to have interoperability, you want to charge seamlessly in your own country, but also abroad. You want to be aware of the prices, price transparency, but also keep in mind the possibilities of this new innovation. It can create a lot of value, new jobs, much more storage for sustainable energy, and thus achieving climate goals more rapidly. And the European way to do this is an open market with level playing field. So keep your fundament, free movement of people, goods, services in mind. that is my recommendation for you.
Thank you. Anything to add, gentlemen, on the governance aspect, or has everything been covered by?
I think we should, when it comes to the governance or the regulation, we should leave the sectoral thinking and start to think more cross-sectoral. That because sometimes we as a public authority close sectoral thinking, that colleagues from the transport see electric vehicles only from the point of view of problem of transport sector, and the same with energy. If we connect this way of thinking about the electromobility and leave the sector thinking, I think we will be able to prepare a good regulation.
Thank you. I'm just checking if there had been other more technical questions from the chat, as it's very difficult to follow instantly. Well, there have been some comments on the let's say resource dependencies for lithium, cobalt. I mean, that's a discussion that we are aware about, trying to address that through the different channels, such as sustainable OECD guidance for sustainable sourcing for materials for batteries. I don't see, unless there is a hand raise, I don't see an urgent request for floor. So I would like to,
if I may, very briefly, because I'm also looking at the chat and to come back to the last point. Look at what we're discussing here, the possibilities that we are discussing here. Imagine having the possibility to discuss that with petrol and diesel car. There's just no way. So when you want to look at the potential for the grid flexibility, for consumers to save money, for energy market to be more integrated, for people to move across EU, be able to smart charge anywhere. This is something that cannot be discussed in a fossil fueled world. So I want to end up on this positive note that even though it's highly complicated, the potential is enormous, and that this is the good news of today.
Yeah, and in addition to that one, of course, there are issues with lithium. But keep in mind, if we want to do the energy transition, grid operators have to invest heavily into their grid. So what we're also doing is shifting a little bit from copper investments in the traditional grid towards adding a little bit of new material, lithium, on the grid. So storage, and whether that storage is stationary or dynamic in electric vehicles. So your system of elements changes a little bit from 100% copper to a bit more diverse.
Thank you all. I think that we wouldn't exhaust the subject if we were discussing the whole day or even the whole week, because that's extremely. I mean, the subject is very wide. But I wanted really to personally thank all of you speakers and the contributors for raising the attention to the issues you see, and also making them speaking about them. Let's say in this workshop. I would like to now give the floor to my colleague Mark to conclude for the 3 sessions, and then we will inform you how we will follow up. And please stay tuned. Just maybe last slide before I hand over, because there will be other workshops that will follow in our presentation. So if you're interested, please register to those workshops as well. So on the 23rd, we will have enhanced data exchanges at EU level. That links very much to what we have been discussing today. And on the share of the renewable energy on the 24th, as well as more dedicated to the data centers and innovation hubs on the 25th, and prosumer data exchanges on the 3rd of March. Thank you again for this panel and for the previous panels. And now I close to give the floor to Mark, who is the Deputy Head of Unit in our unit and Directorate B in DG Energy.
Kasia. Thank you. So, yes, to me, the difficult task of trying to conclude of all this that has been shared today and all, let's say, all the wisdom that has been poured out, which is a difficult job to try anyway. I think because, of course, throughout the day and in the different panels, a few things came back. So I think it is possible to conclude some main points out of the discussion today, but it's clear that we are only, well, I wouldn't say at the start, but we're only halfway, or we're only somewhere still in the beginning of addressing the issues that came up. So for us, this workshop is a first step to discuss with the stakeholders, with the public and private authorities, the public and private parties, how to better cooperate between and energy sector, develop a coherent governance between energy and mobility if we talk about data exchange, in particular in the context of electric vehicles. And I think here for data, it was key from the conclusion, from the discussions. We need the data exchange to enable smart charging, to enable the integration of renewables, but we also need data exchange to ensure that the electricity grid can meet the increasing demand of for power and for electricity to charge all these electric cars that are going to be in the European market. And we cannot have the situation that the grid will be a constraint for this type of rollout, because for that, the contribution of electric vehicles to addressing climate changes is just too important. And last but not least, I think it was also interesting and important that it was mentioned that consumers will be interested in knowing actually what the electricity is that they charge their car with. Electricity is electricity, but at the same time, knowing what is used to generate the electricity that you put in your car, so that you personally contribute to using renewables or using low carbon electricity is very, very important. So there is also there a need for data exchange. If we are talking about 36 million electric vehicles that we would like to see in Europe before 2030, then we can imagine that the impact on the energy sector and on the electricity grid is growing and will be very big, and the interaction will be very, very important. We are setting the principles out of how this should work in the review of the alternative fuel infrastructure regulation, a review of the directive that is currently being discussed between the Council and the Parliament. The Renewable Energy Directive that addresses this also from the point of view of integrating renewables, and the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive that addresses the availability of charging points and data exchange and the link with buildings. So we are addressing this in the legislation. We're setting the principles, we're setting the, but it's clear that to make the data exchange work, that we need to do more. And I think in particular, again, from the discussion, we're talking about data exchange between many parties. And so this is many to many parties. I think also Jetix commented on this in the beginning. At the moment, they are talking about bilateral agreements for specific services or companies. I think if we want to make this easy and seamless from the point of view of consumers, but also from the businesses that want to offer the services, then we need to address this in a many-to-many way. And then whether this is cloud-based or directly communicating with the car, I think we saw the slide from eBus and from Volkswagen, more or less the same. There are different options. I am not sure at the moment that we need to express a preference, but we need sure that these different possibilities can work, that you can go through the car, the charging point, or the meter and the house, depending on, as a consumer, where you want to optimize. And that again depends on what type of services the companies offer to you. But we need to make sure that there is a choice, that service providers, aggregators, everybody who is here today, most of them at least, can offer different services, and that the consumer has a choice, so that there is also no vendor lock-in or proprietary exchange that prevent these things from happening. I think one other point that was very important to mention that came up, of course, smart charging is in a way, if you look at it from the energy system, only one way of addressing flexibility and addressing the integration of renewables. So it is part of a bigger system. You can also provide similar services from demand response in a house if you have a heat pump, or if you are a big cooling warehouse, you can use capacity. The same for data centers. So there is a lot of different sources of flexibility. Electric cars in particular, if we talk about 36 million by 2030, of course, will be a big market. But if we build, let's say, the road for flexibility and for smart charging and for this type of demand response, that and of course the electric cars will be a big driver and a big user of that road. We also want to make sure that other parties can use that road. So we need to, in that sense, organize it in a way that works for all of them. And the pedestrians, like heat pumps, the big trucks, which could be the big cooling warehouses, as well as the cycler, maybe, let's say, the communities that gather some flexibility together and want to market that. These are, from a grid and from an energy perspective, different technologies that can offer the same service, or that can offer, to some extent, sometimes the same service. And when we build the road, we need to make sure that we build it for all of them. So I think that's also an point that drives this discussion from our point of view. Then I think it was good to hear also in the second panel about where standards are still missing, also pointing to the, if I understood it correctly, the interaction between the car and the home, or the interfaces, let's say, that go from the car to the home or the grid, and the plea for the EU and the EU sector to be more present in the IEC discussion, because of course that's where the global standards are being set. And if we want to export the good experiences and the good services that we are developing in the EU, then having this point taken into account in the national standard drafting is, of course, very important. Last but not least, in terms of, if we're talking about all the things that were being mentioned, I think that the incentives to invest both for the regulated and for the market parties is very important. And then, of course, come back to offering services easy, making the data exchange easy. But it, of course, also has to do with the incentives to invest in the electricity grid to do these things happen. Not just the copper and the hardware, but also the software, the platform providers, or the let's say, transferring the data from the network into important information for the market. There are needs for investments there. And if I then make the link to the framework within which we are discussing what this here today, namely our preparation of a digitalization of energy action plan, then I can assure you that also looking at ways how we can promote these type of investments is something that's very, very important to us to look at, because it all starts with and ends with creating the support for investments in all these type of things. And the investment needs are big. So I think, if we talk now about the challenges ahead, are how can we provide real-time information to the grid on these multiple variables, the renewable resources, the congestion, the tariff data, overall charging demand, with the aim to allow better forecasting, predicting of peak loads. I think this question came also from Sveni, from the DSOs and from the car manufacturers. So how can we increase let's say, the predictability of the market, both in terms of the short-term optimization for charging, but also for the longer-term investments. I think it was clear from the whole discussion today that we need a greater sector integration and collaboration across the different actors between energy, mobility, and new digital technologies. And I think we can see that there are three important reasons for this. To foster collaboration on the planning of the network and investments in the infrastructure for charging, for the grids planning, to enable new services based on flexibility and demand response from the available energy in the electric vehicles, the batteries, the capacity to support the grid, as well as the storage and aggregation services, and to enable all actors, and in particular the citizens, to benefit from the information on the share of the renewable and low carbon electricity available in the grid. And so I think these are the important points. Then I think we can also identify 5 key challenges from this discussion today. If we talk, and they require additional cooperation, both on the technical and on the governance side of things. So first of all, we need to create the right conditions for a business to invest, for the economy, as well as for the legal framework to invest across different domains for bidirectional smart charging, allowing new market entrants to offer innovative services and invest in charging infrastructure. So one part of the solution is obviously that all parties talk among each other and have a clear understanding of the market roles, the responsibilities of the different parties, because that needs to be clear if you want to talk about what data needs to be exchanged. I think the second point, very much in the second panel, talking about the interoperability of protocols and standards to enhance the competition. And without interoperability, the market will remain fragmented, and business and consumers will not enjoy the full benefits of electromobility and of new services such as aggregation or demand response. So this is not just a matter of vehicle to charging point. It goes beyond that. It's also linked to the house, the cloud, etc., like we saw in the slides and the diagrams. And then at data level, at EU level, this is driving, cross-sector functions, cross-individual use cases, such as things like identification, security, protocols, standards, semantics. These are things that are not specific for, let's say, smart charging, but also need to look at in a big framework of data exchange. And then I think to clear the protocol between the aggregators and the network operators, or between the backend of the charging point operators. I think we need to move quickly. That's also clear. We're in a hurry if we want to meet our 2030 targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, if we want to roll out electric vehicles, and if we want to be climate neutral by 2050. We need to act quickly. We're in a continuously moving field. Innovations are going fast. Many standards are not ready yet, which implies limitations for the integration of electric vehicles into the grid and future development of a European data framework that can facilitate the corresponding implementation of new technologies like smart and bidirectional charging or aggregation. So from us, the sense of urgency is definitely felt. And we should not forget then the complementarity between public and private recharging in terms of protocols, standards, and data exchange. We need to understand the needs of both sides, and we need to work together. And I think therefore this discussion was very, very useful. As I said, we noted the urgency, we share the urgency, and we are looking at the new proposals like the in-vehicle data that should open up, for example, battery data to relevant mobility and energy stakeholders. So this was also duly noted. Then, of course, we're talking about making sure that this happens, third point, that this happens in a secure and privacy respectful way. So we need to make sure that we only, let's say that we aggregate where it can be, that we make things anonymous where this can happen, and that we do things in line with the data access regulation. Secondly, we need to make sure that the data exchange frameworks and the preparation for data spaces, both in mobility and energy, support data sovereignty and preserve data control. And so we need to identify the commonalities and the consensus across mobility and energy data spaces. The fourth point, coming to the governance and the last panel discussion, I think this was very, very interesting. I think we all agree that we need to set up a governance for data exchange between energy and mobility, and that we work on data services that so that we can address the issue of fragmentation at national level and at EU level between the different sectors. So we need to build on the complementarity between the emerging mobility data space and the challenges identified by the work of the Sustainable Transport Forum. And we need to recognize the complexity at the national level between energy, mobility, and IT. Like it was mentioned by some speakers, they are often dealt with by different ministries, and we should work on a governance that is simple and that empowers the public authorities also to play the role in fullest and make things happen. I think we heard interesting ideas about setting up a public authority that works across sectors. I think also in the chat I saw the reference to the Implementing Act on metering and consumption data that looks at a type of public setting up a type of organization that checks how these data exchange issues are organized. This is of course limited to metering and consumption data in electricity, but I think we can take some inspiration from that, and it is also something that we are looking at in data exchange framework that we want to set up as part of as a follow-up to the action plan. So it's clear from all this, a data exchange framework is needed that brings together mobility and transport. I think we can bear in mind this request and this, let's say, if there is a need for a public authority to act on this. I think that our approach will be to first see what would be the tasks of such an authority, because of course setting something like that up will require more time, it will require a legal basis, so that is not for now. So I would also urge that we don't let the progress on this issue and the dialogue that we've had here today depend on such a public authority. We need to set up a governance that can prepare the ground, that can bring the way forward, that can promote this data exchange like we are discussing it today forward, even if we don't have such a public authority in place. And then last point, the fifth point. So we should, of course, we have touched upon some points here and there, like the permitting processes that are important to get the deployment of the infrastructure, both the charging points, but also the bigger infrastructure that is needed to support e-mobility. This is something we're looking at in the Commission, and our colleagues are preparing action on this through a communication that is foreseen, I think, for May this year. And then, of course, cybersecurity. How do we make sure that all of this is done in a cyber secure way? Because otherwise, if these things go wrong, then we can very quickly stop talking about all the nice things we want to do. Because if this means power outages and hacks, then the things are becoming very, very difficult. So this is important for us. And here we are, of course, addressing this also in the Digitalization of Energy Action Plan. And we're working with our colleagues that are preparing for example, a network code on the cross-border electricity flow cybersecurity, and the Network Information Security Directive that's currently being reviewed. And there are a lot of initiatives in relation to cybersecurity. Is of course high on the political agenda, and there it's clear to us and to all the colleagues also in Connect that the energy system merits a lot of attention to make sure that that is very, very cyber secure. So this is quite a mouthful of conclusions. It's not an easy job. As I said, I've tried my best to summarize and reflect all the wealth of discussion that has been happening. So I think we're coming to the end of this workshop, but not before me thanking all of you who have participated today. I've seen the very lively discussions in the chat. That was very, very useful. I've seen the moderators having a difficult job to at the same time moderate the discussion and keep an eye on the chat to bring the most interesting questions or the appropriate questions also back into the discussion. There are much more questions. We will take note, keep register of those. As you know, this is being recorded, so we will not lose all the information and wisdom that you have shared with us today. So I would like to thank all the participants, the moderators, and of course the speakers and the panelists, because I think we learned a great deal. We've made a step forward. We are not there yet, but this has been very, very useful also for us to see a way forward. And when I say us, I think from this program, it's clear that here we are very closely working with the colleagues in DG Move and DG Connect, because we need to practice what we preach. If we talk about going across sectors, we need to do that within the Commission as well. And I think that is going very, very well. I think the interest is good. That's also a good thing. we are going to take all this up for the preparation of the Digitalization of Energy Action Plan. We're going to look at a way to set up a data governance framework. So far, we've been saying that probably this should come out in June. But this is, of course, subject to timing that the Commission sets, and that's not up to us. And it looks now that we will probably more likely go out in autumn. We will in autumn and end of September also have the European Sustainable Energy Week, where the digital and energy twin transition, or going green and digital, will be the main theme of the Sustainable Energy Week. So this topic will not be off the agenda, and that's a good thing. Kasia already mentioned the upcoming workshops. I think in particular in relation to what we were discussing today and last Wednesday, the one on the 23rd of February is particularly relevant, because there we want to look at really what are the priority use cases. And I think from today, it's clear that electromobility is one of them, but we'll bring that discussion back on the 23rd. And looking particularly at the new role of consumers and prosumers and what can they do on the 3rd of March. So we still have an interesting next week ahead of us. So for now, we'd just like to thank all of you participating, my colleagues for setting this up in such an excellent way. I think it's been truly, truly inspiring. So thanks a lot, and looking forward to working with you as we take this file forward. Thank you very much. And have a good weekend.
Thank you all. So for the very good, Mark, also for the very good summary, for our colleagues also for the technical backup. The session will be recorded and we will put it on our website. Have a good afternoon and have a good weekend as well. Thanks.